Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was sent to the world of RWBY and got married to the entire team RWBY, RWBY, Weiss, Blake, and Young. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Maelstrom of Remnant. The end was not a quiet fading, but a violent, discordant shriek that tore at the very fabric of existence. One moment, Naruto Uzumaki was a maelstrom of golden light and righteous fury. His fist connecting with the self-proclaimed goddess who sought to enslave all of reality. The next, he was nothing. A collection of scattered thoughts and fading sensations. Pulled apart like thread from a spool. There was a shearing sensation, a feeling of being turned inside out, and a deafening roar that was both sound and silence. Then, impact. He slammed into solid ground with enough force to splinter ancient trees and carve a shallow crater into the rich, dark earth. The air was knocked from his lungs in a ragged gasp. For a long, silent moment, he just lay there, the world a-spinning. Unfocused blur. Pain was a distant, familiar companion. He tasted blood and dirt. The smell of pine and damp soil filled his senses, but it was all wrong. The air was too clean, too thin. The very energy of the world felt hollow. The vibrant thrum of natural chakra was gone, replaced by a strange, cold emptiness that pricked at his senses like 1,000 tiny needles. Slowly, painfully, Naruto pushed himself onto his elbows. His iconic orange and black jacket was shredded, reduced to little more than burnt rags hanging from his shoulders. His pants were torn, and his body was a canvas of cuts and bruises. He ran a hand through his blonde hair, feeling the sticky dampness of blood. A quick, internal check confirmed the worst. The connection he'd shared with Kurama, the nine-tailed fox, was there, but it was frayed, stretched thin across an impossible distance. The fox was a raging, silent inferno locked deep inside him, his own confusion and anger echoing Naruto's. "Where are we?" Kurama's voice was a low growl in the back of his mind, strained and distant. "I don't know," Naruto thought back, his eyes scanning the alien forest. The trees were too dark. Their bark a strange shade of black-green. The leaves were a crimson so deep they looked like dried blood. A broken moon hung shattered in the sky, a sight so fundamentally wrong it made his stomach churn. This wasn't his world. A twig snapped behind him. Naruto was on his feet in an instant, his exhaustion vanishing under a wave of pure, battle-honed instinct. He didn't reach for a kunai, he had none. He simply settled into a low fighting stance, his body a coiled spring of latent power. From the shadows of the blood-red trees, they emerged. At first, he thought they were wolves, but the thought died as soon as it formed. They were too large, their bodies covered in thick, black fur that seemed to drink the light. Bony white plates, like twisted armor, adorned their backs and skulls. And their eyes glowed with a malevolent, predatory red. A low, guttural snarl echoed through the clearing, a sound devoid of life, filled only with mindless hunger. Naruto didn't need to be a sage to feel the palpable wave of negativity rolling off them. It was pure, distilled malice. Hate, fear, and despair given physical form. They weren't animals. They were monsters. One of the creatures, larger than the rest, lunged. It was impossibly fast, a blur of black fur and snapping jaws. For a huntsman in training, it would have been a lethal threat. For Naruto Uzumaki, it was just slow. He didn't even seem to move. One moment he was in the crater, the next he was beside the beast, his hand clasped around its throat. There was no grand technique, no shouted name of a jutsu. Just a simple, brutal application of force. He squeezed. The creature's armored neck, which could have likely withstood a high-caliber bullet, imploded with a wet, crunching sound. He didn't let it go. Using the dead monster's momentum, he swung its 200-pound body like a club, smashing it into two of its packmates and sending them tumbling into the trees. He dropped the corpse and faced the remaining dozen. They hesitated for a split second, their primal minds unable to process what had just happened. Their target, who should have been torn to shreds, had just obliterated their alpha with his bare hands. That hesitation was all Naruto needed. He blurred forward, a phantom of orange and blonde. His movements were a deadly dance, economical and precise. An elbow shattered a jaw. A heel kick caved in a skull. A knife hand strike severed a spine. He flowed between them, a force of nature. He channeled the barest wisp of chakra into his fist, and the resulting punch didn't just kill the creature it it sent a shockwave through its body that caused it to explode in a shower of black smoke. As the last creature lunged, he held up a hand. A swirling sphere of pure, blue energy materialized in his palm with a sound like 1,000 birds chirping. He didn't need to shout its name. He simply met the monster's charge, pressing the Rasengan into its chest. The beast was obliterated. The sheer Konku SSIVE force of the attack tore a trench through the forest floor and vaporized 3 of the unnaturally colored trees behind it. Silence descended once more, broken only by Naruto's heavy breathing. He stood in the center of the clearing, surrounded by the slowly dissolving black mist of his slain foes. A strange, unsettling process. They weren't leaving bodies behind. They were simply ceasing to exist. Whoa! The single word cut through the quiet. Naruto's head snapped up. Standing at the edge of the clearing, their weapons drawn, were 4 girls. They couldn't have been much younger than him. And they were all staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. One, clad in a red hooded cloak, held a massive, mechanical scythe that looked like it weighed more than she did. Her silver eyes were wide with a mixture of awe and shock. Beside her, a girl in pristine white with a side-swept ponytail held a rapier poised with aristocratic grace, her blue eyes narrowed in suspicion. To her other side stood a girl with long, black hair and captivating amber eyes, a pair of black cat ears twitching atop her head. She held a black ribbon that seemed to ripple with a life of its own. And finally, a blonde with a wild mane of hair and lilac eyes had her fists raised, encased in a pair of heavy-duty gauntlets. They were warriors. That much was clear, but they felt different. He could sense the energy radiating from them, a protective shimmer that coated their bodies. It wasn't chakra, it was something else, an armor for the soul. The girl in red took a hesitant step forward, her scythe still held at the ready. You just took out a pack of Beowulfs. With your bare hands. And that blue ball thingy. Naruto remained silent, his gaze shifting between the 4 of them. He was still processing their language. The sage's power inside him working furiously to translate the foreign tongue, turning the garbled sounds into coherent thoughts. He was outnumbered, in an unknown land, and facing armed combatants. He remained perfectly still, a statue of deadly potential. The blonde with the gauntlets let out a low whistle. Nice moves, Blondie. But who are you? I've never seen a huntsman fight like that. He's not a huntsman, the girl in white said, her voice sharp and accusatory. Look at him. His clothes are bizarre, he has no weapon, and his aura is strange. I can barely get a read on it. She took a step forward, her rapier pointed at his chest. Identify yourself. What kingdom are you from? Who do you work for? The questions were rapid fire, but Naruto's mind was catching up. Kingdoms, huntsman, aura, these words meant nothing to him. He met the white-haired girl's icy glare with a calm, steady gaze of his own. His exhaustion was beginning to set back in, a deep, bone-weary ache. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice raspy. It was the first time he'd spoken, and the words felt foreign in his own mouth. The black-haired girl's cat ears twitched again. She spoke softly, her amber eyes full of caution. He's telling the truth, Weiss. I don't sense any deception. The girl in white, Weiss, scoffed. Blake, that's ridiculous. He just single-handedly wiped out a pack of Grimm that would have given a lesser team trouble. He's obviously a trained fighter. Naruto's eyes locked onto Blake's. He noticed her ears, so different from anyone he'd ever seen. A faunus, he would later learn she was called. But in that moment, all he saw was a wary understanding in her eyes. She saw him not just as a threat, but as a person. The girl in red, seemingly unable to contain her curiosity any longer, lowered her scythe and took another step forward, a friendly, if hesitant, smile on her face. My name is Ruby Rose. This is Weiss Schnee, Blake Belladonna, and my sister. Yang Xiaolong. She pointed to each of them in turn. You look like you're in trouble. We just want to help. Naruto looked at Ruby's outstretched hand. There was no guile in her expression. Only genuine concern. He saw the loss and confusion mirrored in his own soul reflected in her silver eyes. He was alone, battered, and stranded in a world he didn't understand. For the first time since his brutal arrival, a sliver of hope cut through the despair. He finally relaxed his stance, the tension draining from his shoulders. "Naruto," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki." Quote. Yang's aggressive posture softened into a playful smirk. "Well, Naruto Uzumaki, you've got a weird name. But you've got some serious skills. Any chance you see teach me that move where you make a guy explode by punching him?" Weiss rolled her eyes. "Yang, be serious. He's an unknown variable. He's an unknown variable that just saved us the trouble of cleaning up this mess," Yang shot back, gesturing to the dissipating black smoke. RWBY ignored their bickering. "You're hurt," she said, her eyes tracing the cuts and bruises on his arms. "We should get you back to Beacon. Professor Ozpin will know what to do." Naruto had no idea what a beacon, or an Ozpin, was, but it sounded better than staying in this creepy, blood-colored forest with its shattered moon. He gave a single, tired nod. Okay. The journey to Beacon was a silent assault on his senses. They boarded a craft he could only describe as a metal bird, a bullhead, they called it. It rose into the air without wings or chakra, a marvel of technology that was utterly alien to him. Through the window, he saw the sprawling city of Vale and, in the distance, a majestic cliffside academy, with towering spires that seemed to pierce the heavens. Beacon. He said little, content to observe and absorb. The four girls kept their distance, whispering amongst themselves. He could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and something else he couldn't quite place, admiration. He leaned his head against the cool glass of the window, the hum of the engines a strange lullaby. He was so far from home. The thought was a physical weight, threatening to crush him. They didn't take him to an infirmary. Instead, they led him through pristine, echoing halls filled with students who stared at his ragged appearance. And then into an elevator that took them to the top of the highest tower. The circular room they entered was dominated by a massive window overlooking the entire campus. The interior was filled with the quiet clicking and whirring of giant clockwork gears. Behind a large, clean desk sat a man with silver hair and small, shaded spectacles. He held a mug in one hand and a cane in the other. And he watched their approach with an unnervingly calm expression. "Team RWBY, he said, his voice smooth and measured. "To what do I owe the pleasure? And who, may I ask, is your new friend?" RWBY stepped forward, ever the eager leader. "Professor Ozpin, sir. We found him in the Emerald Forest. There was a huge pack of Beowulfs, but he took care of them. All of them, by himself." Ozpin's gaze shifted to Naruto. His eyes, visible behind the lenses, were ancient and sharp. They seemed to see right through him, peeling back the layers of exhaustion and awe into the raging inferno of power that lay dormant within. "As that's so." Ozpin took a slow sip from his mug. "I was alerted to a significant energy spike in that sector. An anomaly. I suspect that was you." Naruto knew this was the critical moment. He could lie, could feign amnesia, could try to bluff his way through. But he was a terrible liar, and he was too tired for games. The truth was all he had left. "Yes," Naruto said, his voice clear and steady. "It was." He met Ozpin's gaze without flinching. "I'm not from this world. I was fighting a war against an enemy that could warp reality. There was an attack, a tear in space and time. I was pulled through. I woke up in your forest." The four girls stared at him, dumbfounded. Yang's jaw was slack. Weiss looked utterly scandalized by the absurdity of the claim. Blake's eyes were wide with shock, and RWBY just looked confused. Ozpin, however, didn't so much as blink. He simply set his mug down on his desk with a soft click. "A fascinating story. And this power you wield. It is not an aura. Not a semblance. What is it?" "It's called chakra," Naruto explained. "It's the energy of my world. A combination of spiritual and physical energy. Everyone in my home has it. But few can use it like I can." There was a long, heavy silence in the room, broken only by the ticking of the giant clock. Ozpin leaned forward, his hands clasped on his desk. "A demonstration, if you would be so kind. Nothing destructive. Just a sample. Naruto knew this was a test. A test of his power, and a test of his control. He closed his eyes for a second, reaching inward, past the exhaustion, past the pain, and brushed against the simmering ocean of Kurama's chakra. He pulled forth the smallest drop, a minuscule fraction of its true power. But in this world, a drop was a flood. The atmosphere in the office instantly changed. The temperature plummeted. A crushing pressure filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Team RWBY staggered back, their Hon.ds flying to their chests as they gasped for air. It wasn't just physical pressure, it was a spiritual weight, an ancient and immense presence that dwarfed their own auras into non-existence. Golden red energy, visible as a shimmering haze, bled from Naruto's skin. His blue eyes shifted to a piercing crimson with slitted pupils, and the whisker-like marks on his cheeks darkened, becoming more pronounced, more feral. He held up his right hand. He didn't need to form a Rasengan. Instead, he simply let the raw energy coalesce, forming a small, dense sphere of chaotic, swirling power that pulsed with an audible, menacing hum. It was a contained star, a miniature sun of pure, untamed force. Ozpin's calm facade finally cracked. His eyes were wide behind his glasses, fixed on the sphere of energy in Naruto's hand. He had witnessed the power of the maidens, stood against the darkness of Salem, and lived for more lifetimes than he could count. But he had never, ever felt anything like this. This was primal. This was elemental. This was the power of creation and destruction held in the palm of a boy's hand. Naruto held the form for a 5 count, then clenched his fist. The energy vanished without a sound, and the oppressive pressure in the room disappeared as quickly as it had come. His eyes returned to their normal, vibrant blue. The girls from Team RWBY were still breathing heavily, looking at him with a new, profound level of awe and terror. Ozpin took a moment to compose himself, adjusting his spectacles. "I see," he said, his voice barely a whisper before it returned to its normal, measured tone. "It seems your story, however improbable, is true." He stood up and walked around his desk, stopping a few feet from Naruto. "You are alone, Mr. Uzumaki. You are in a world you do not understand. A world that is facing its own war, fought in the shadows. You need a place to stay, a place to learn, and potentially, a way to find your way home." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the 4 girls who were now looking at Naruto not just as a curiosity, but as something more. A protector, a phenomenon. "And I," Ozpin continued, "am in need of unique talents. I have a proposition for you. I will grant you sanctuary within Beacon Academy. We will provide you with lodging, food, and an education on the ways of Remnant. We will also commit our resources to researching your predicament. In exchange, you will enroll as a student. You will be placed on a team, Team RWBY, in fact, as a special 5th member. You will lend your considerable strength to the defense of this world." Naruto looked from Ozpin to the girls. Weiss was still looking at him with a calculating, though no longer hostile, expression. Blake's guardedness had been replaced by an intense, analytical curiosity. Yang was grinning from ear to ear, practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of having this powerhouse on her team. And then his eyes met Ruby's. Her silver eyes were shining, filled with an unadulterated, pure-hearted wonder. She saw his power, not as a weapon to be feared, but as something amazing, something heroic. In her eyes, he wasn't a monster or an anomaly. He was just Naruto. He was lost, but he wasn't adrift anymore. He had a direction, a purpose. It wasn't the one he'd left behind, but it was one he could grasp. A small, genuine smile, the first since he'd arrived, touched his lips. "Okay," he said, the single word sealing his fate. "I'm in." A silent understanding passed between the 5 of them. A new piece had been placed on the board, and the entire game had just changed. Team RWBY didn't just gain a new member. They had unknowingly bound their destinies to a force of nature, a maelstrom of power and will that would either save their world or tear it apart. Far away, in the dark lands where the Grimm were born, a woman with skin as pale as bone and eyes of black and red looked into a pool of dark energy. A seer Grimm swirled within its depths, showing her a flickering image, a flash of golden red light, a shattered forest, and the face of a blonde-haired boy with eyes that burned with a power she had never known. A slow, cruel smile spread across Salem's face. The game had just become infinitely more interesting. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Soul's Armor. The walk from Ozpin's clockwork tower to Team RWBY's dormitory was a masterclass in strained silence. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a buzzing, uncertain energy that hung between the five of them like a static charge. Naruto, for his part, was a walking study in exhaustion. The adrenaline from the forest encounter and the subsequent display of power had faded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep weariness. Every step was a conscious effort. He was acutely aware of the four girls flanking him, their gazes like physical things against his skin. Yang, predictably, broke the silence. She slung an arm around her sister's shoulders, her lilac eyes fixed on Naruto's back. So, she began, her voice a little too loud in the echoing hallway. A whole other world, huh? Got any other tricks up your sleeve? Can you fly? Shoot lasers out of your eyes? Ooh, can you turn into a giant, city-stomping toad? Yang, for own sake, be quiet, Weiss hissed, shooting her teammate a venomous glare. The man is clearly in distress. He's been displaced. Show some sensitivity. Her concern was couched in her usual icy tone. But it was there, a flicker of empathy behind the stern facade. She cast a sideways glance at Naruto's tattered clothes and the dried blood in his hair, a faint wrinkle of distaste on her perfect nose. I'm just trying to lighten the mood, Ice Queen, Yang retorted, undeterred. It's not every day you get a new teammate who can punch monsters into next week. Blake remained silent, her amber eyes narrowed in thought. She walked with a fluid, almost predatory grace, observing Naruto not as a potential friend or a threat, but as a puzzle. She saw the way he moved, not with the practiced efficiency of a huntsman, but with a deeper, more ingrained economy of motion. It was the movement of someone who hadn't just trained for battle, but had been forged in it. Shaped by the crucible of a war she couldn't possibly imagine. RWBY was the most transparent of them all. She practically bounced with every step, her silver eyes wide with 1,000 unspoken questions. She kept opening her mouth to speak, then closing it, seemingly overwhelmed by where to even begin. Finally, she settled on the most immediate, practical concern. So, where are you going to sleep? The question hung in the air as they arrived at their dorm room door. It was a simple, stark reality that cut through the fantastical nature of his situation. He was a refugee, a castaway nothing but the torn clothes on his back. Weiss unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a room that was a chaotic but charming reflection of its occupants. Bunk beds were haphazardly made. Scrolls and textbooks were piled on desks, and a poster for a rock band called The Achieve Men was taped to one wall. It was a space of vibrant, youthful energy, and Naruto felt like an old, worn-out relic standing on its threshold. We did not exactly plan for a fifth roommate, Weiss stated, gesturing vaguely at the limited floor space. Yang clapped her hands together. Sleepover. I call top bunk, she declared, which was pointless as she already had a top bunk. Blake offered a more practical solution. We can request another mattress from the staff. For tonight, we can make a space on the floor. Her voice was soft, but carried a quiet authority. Naruto simply nodded, too tired to argue or even care. The floor is fine, he said, his voice raspy. He just wanted to close his eyes, to let the world fade away. If only for a few hours. The girls moved with an awkward, fumbling energy, trying to accommodate him. RWBY, in a burst of hospitality, gathered up all the spare blankets and pillows she could find. Creating a makeshift pallet near the window, Yang offered him a spare set of pajamas, a pair of black shorts with a yellow bumblebee pattern and a worn-out t-shirt. They were a little small, but infinitely better than his shredded gear. Weiss, after a moment of internal debate, disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a first aid kit, her expression a mask of detached professionalism. Sit, she ordered, pointing to the edge of Blake's bed. Naruto obeyed without question. Weiss worked with a surprising gentleness, cleaning the cut on his forehead with an antiseptic wipe. Her touch was light and cool. He flinched slightly as the antiseptic stung, and her eyes met his for a fraction of a second. He saw not pity, but a flicker of grudging respect. You heal remarkably fast, she commented. Her voice low. Some of these cuts are already closing. Is that another one of your chakra abilities? Something like that, he murmured, his gaze distant. He was thinking of Kurama, of the fox's immense regenerative power that had saved his life more times than he could count. The connection was still there, a faint warmth in the pit of his stomach, but it felt weak, tired. Once his wounds were tended to and he had changed into the borrowed clothes, an unspoken truce of exhaustion settled over the room. The girls climbed into their bunks, the lights were dimmed, and a quiet stillness fell. But for Naruto, sleep was a distant shore he couldn't reach. He lay on the pallet, staring up at the shattered moon through the window. It was so fundamentally wrong, a constant, silent reminder of how far he was from home. Every shadow in the room felt alien, every creak of the building a foreign sound. The sheer weight of his loss pressed down on him. Sakura, Kakashi, Shikamaru, Hinata, all of them. Gone. An entire world, an entire lifetime, snatched away in a single, violent instant. He felt a familiar sting behind his eyes, but he refused to let the tears fall. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a leader, a hero. He had to be strong. You're an idiot if you think you have to bear this alone. Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, the familiar grumpiness a strange comfort. Their world, their rules. But the grief is yours. Don't bury it, or it will fester. Naruto closed his eyes, retreating into the quiet space of his own mind, to the familiar red-barred chamber where his partner resided. The giant fox was lying down, his 9 tails swishing restlessly. The chamber, usually flooded with a powerful, vibrant energy, felt dimmer, the air heavy. You're weak, Naruto observed, his mental projection standing before the great beast. And you're a master of the obvious, Kurama retorted, one massive eye cracking open to glare at him. Being ripped from our dimension and thrown into this spiritual vacuum took its toll. My chakra is recovering, but it's slow. This world is barren. There's no natural energy to draw from. Everything we use will have to come from our own reserves. Naruto looked down at his hands. So, no more giant Rasenshurikens or multi-shadow clone armies. Not unless you want to burn yourself out to a husk. Your own reserves are vast, Kit. Larger than any shinobi in history. But they are not infinite. Not here. You need to be smart. Economical. Save the big guns for when they're truly needed. Kurama's tone softened, losing its biting edge. This Ozpin character, he is more than he seems. His eyes have seen too much. Be wary of him. And these girls, they're good people, Naruto said immediately. Perhaps, the fox conceded. But they are children playing at war. You are a soldier who has already survived one. There is a difference. Do not let their innocence be a liability. Naruto fell silent, absorbing the fox's counsel. As always, Kurama was the voice of harsh, cynical reason that tempered his own boundless optimism. He was right. He couldn't afford to be reckless. He was alone, and his power, for the first time in a long time, was a finite resource. He eventually drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, his dreams filled with flashes of a 10-tailed beast, a woman with rabbit horns, and the faces of friends he would never see again. He was woken by the smell of coffee and the sound of a hairdryer. Sunlight streamed through the window, and for a terrifying moment, he had no idea where he was. Then the memories of the previous day crashed back down on him. The forest, the monsters, the shattered moon. Yang was humming a cheerful tune as she blasted her long, blonde hair with a dryer. Weiss was already dressed in her pristine white uniform, meticulously organizing a stack of textbooks on her desk. Blake was sitting on her bed, engrossed in a book, a small, serene smile on her face. And RWBY was standing right over him, holding out a small, rectangular device. Morning, she chirped, her silver eyes bright with energy. Didn't want to wake you, but we have class soon. Professor Port's class is a real snooze fest. But Glinda's combat class is right after, and that's the best. Oh, this is a scroll. It's like a phone, and a computer, and an ID, and, well, it's everything. Ozpin sent one over for you. It's already got your schedule and a basic map of the school. Naruto sat up, taking the sleek, glass-like device. It felt strange and delicate in his calloused hands. He fumbled with it for a moment. Before a hologram of his own face flickered to life, along with the name, Naruto Uzumaki, and a class schedule. It was a piece of technology so far beyond anything he had ever seen, it felt like magic. "Thanks," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. Getting ready for the day was another exercise in awkward charity. Since all he had were the tattered remains of his mission gear and Yang's pajamas, Blake offered him a simple, practical outfit. A pair of black cargo pants and a plain orange t-shirt. It was a strange coincidence of color that made him feel a little more like himself. As they walked to class together, Naruto became a spectacle. Students stopped and stared, whispering amongst themselves. He was the new variable, the mystery that had appeared out of nowhere. He ignored them, his focus on his new teammates. He listened as Yang complained about an upcoming exam, as Weiss corrected her grammar, and as RWBY detailed the finer points of weapon maintenance. He was an outsider listening in, but for the first time, he didn't feel entirely alone. Professor Port's class on the Grim was as boring as RWBY had promised. The portly, mustachioed professor spent most of the hour telling a long, rambling story about his youth that had very little to do with the subject at hand. Naruto, however, found it fascinating. He learned the names of the creatures he had fought, Beowulfs. He learned that they were drawn to negative emotions, that they were soulless creatures of destruction, and that the huntsmen and huntresses were the sworn protectors of humanity against this tide of darkness. It was a different kind of war, but a war nonetheless. Then came combat class. The classroom was a massive arena, with stadium seating for spectators and a large, open stage in the center. A tall, stern-looking woman with blonde hair tied in a tight bun and a pair of riding crops stood at the center of the stage. This was Glinda Goodwitch. Her sharp, intelligent eyes scanned the assembled students, missing nothing. "Today," she announced, her voice echoing through the hall, "we will be focusing on the fundamentals of aura. For many of you, your aura is an unconscious shield, a second skin you have relied upon your entire lives. But it is so much more. It is the manifestation of your soul. It can heal, it can protect, and it can be channeled into a unique power known as a semblance." Her gaze swept across the room and landed, unerringly, on Naruto. "We have a new student joining us today," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Naruto Uzumaki. At the request of Professor Ozpin, he has been assigned to Team RWBY. Mr. Uzumaki, please come down to the stage." A murmur went through the crowd. All eyes were on him as he made his way down the steps. He moved with a quiet confidence that belied his simple attire. He met Glinda's scrutinizing gaze without wavering. "As you are new to our curriculum, we must first get a baseline reading of your aura," Glinda explained, tapping her scroll. A holographic display flickered to life beside her, showing a silhouette of a human body with a meter beside it. "This will measure the strength and quantity of your soul's armor. Please stand still." Naruto did as he was told. Glinda pointed a device at him. The students leaned forward in anticipation. They had all heard the rumors that this new student had single-handedly destroyed a pack of Grim. They expected the meter to shatter, to overload. The device whirred. Glinda frowned. She tapped it, as if it were broken, and tried again. The result was the same. The holographic display remained stubbornly, resolutely empty. The meter read 0. "That's not possible," Glinda said, her composure finally cracking. "Everyone has aura. It's the source of life itself. Without it, you wouldn't be able to survive a common cold, let alone a Grim attack." "I told you," Naruto said simply. "I don't have aura, I have chakra." The students erupted into confused whispers. "Chakra? What's that? No aura. He must be lying." A loud, arrogant voice cut through the noise. "He's probably just a weakling from the outer villages. He probably cheated his way in here." The voice belonged to Cardin Winchester, the hulking leader of Team CRDL. He and his cronies were laughing, pointing at Naruto. Glinda's eye twitched in annoyance. "Silence," she snapped, and the room fell quiet. Her eyes narrowed at Naruto. "Professor Ozpin may have his reasons for admitting you, but this is my classroom. And in my classroom, we prove our worth through combat. Mr. Winchester, since you are so eager to speak, you and your team will be Mr. Uzumaki's sparring partners." Cardin's cruel smirk widened. "With pleasure. We'll try not to break him too badly." Team RWBY watched from the stands. a knot of apprehension in their stomachs. This isn't fair, RWBY muttered. It's 4 against 1, and he doesn't even have aura to protect him. Don't worry, Rubes, Young said, though her knuckles were white where she gripped the railing. I think Blondie can handle himself. Blake said nothing, her eyes fixed on Naruto. She remembered the clearing, the effortless way he had dispatched the Beowulfs. This wasn't a fight, it was a demonstration. On the stage, Team CRDL took their positions, brandishing their weapons, a mace, a sword, and 2 axes. Naruto stood opposite them, empty-handed, his posture relaxed. He looked less like a fighter and more like a boy waiting for a bus. Begin, Glinda called out. Cardin charged, his heavy mace raised high. This is for embarrassing me, he roared. Naruto didn't move, he simply watched the attack, his blue eyes calm and analytical. He saw the sloppy footwork, the overcommitted swing, the openings that were so large he could have driven a carriage through them. At the last possible second, as the mace was about to crash down on his skull, he vanished. It wasn't a burst of speed, not like RWBY's semblance. He was simply gone. Cardin stumbled, the momentum of his missed swing carrying him forward. He looked around wildly. Where did he? A sharp, painful jab to the back of his neck sent his entire body into a state of temporary paralysis. He collapsed to the ground, his mace clattering uselessly beside him. He could see, he could hear, but he couldn't move a single muscle. Naruto was standing behind him, his 2 fingers extended the nerve strike he had just delivered. The rest of Team CRDL stared in shock for a moment before charging in a disorganized mob. Naruto met them with a sigh. It was like swatting flies. He ducked under a sword swing, using the attacker's own arm as a lever to throw him into his axe-wielding teammate. He spun on his heel, his leg sweeping out in a low kick that took out the 4th member at the knees. The entire fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. 3 members of Team CRDL were groaning on the floor, and their leader was paralyzed, his eyes wide with humiliated rage. Naruto hadn't broken a sweat. He hadn't used a single jutsu. He hadn't even used a fraction of his true strength. It was pure, unadulterated skill. A stunned silence filled the arena. The students stared, their jaws agape. Glinda Goodwich's composure was completely shattered. She was looking at Naruto as if he were an alien life form. Naruto turned to look at her, a slightly apologetic expression on his face. Did I pass? The tension broke. A single, loud whoop came from the stands. It was Yang. Soon, others joined in, a wave of applause and impressed whistles washing over the arena. They had just witnessed a complete, effortless dismantling of a 4-man team by a single, unarmed boy with no aura. Later that day, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the beacon courtyard, Naruto found himself sitting on a bench, trying to make sense of his new scroll. The device was still stubbornly unintuitive to him. Having trouble, he looked up to see RWBY standing in front of him, a hesitant smile on her face. She held out a small box. I brought you something. It's a lean card. It's like money. Ozpin set it up for you, so you can buy stuff. Like new clothes, or dust rounds, or cookies. Naruto took the card, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. Thanks, RWBY. No problem, she said, plopping down on the bench beside him. What you did in class today, that was incredible. You were like, whoosh and bam. And they were all just down. How did you do that? Was that chakra too? Her questions were a rapid-fire barrage of pure, unadulterated enthusiasm. It was a far cry from the suspicion and fear he had seen in the eyes of others. To RWBY, his power wasn't strange or terrifying. It was just cool. It's just taijutsu, he explained. Hand-to-hand combat. It's the first thing you learn as a shinobi. Before RWBY could ask what a shinobi was, they were joined by the rest of the team. Yang leaned against the back of the bench, a proud smirk on her face. You really showed that jerk Cardin a thing or two. I think I'm in love, she said with a dramatic wink. Weiss stood a little way off, her arms crossed, though her expression was no longer icy. Your fighting style is unorthodox, she admitted, which from her was the highest form of praise. But undeniably effective. You possess a tactical acumen that is impressive. Blake sat down on Naruto's other side, her book in her lap. She was quiet for a moment before speaking, her amber eyes full of a thoughtful light. You never went for a finishing blow, she observed. You incapacitated them, quickly and efficiently, without causing any lasting damage. You showed incredible restraint. Naruto looked at each of them in turn. The fiery, protective sister. The proud, disciplined heiress. The quiet, observant intellectual. And the bright, shining beacon of hope. They were so different from the friends he had lost, yet in their own way, they were just as fierce, just as loyal. For the first time since arriving in this strange, broken world, he felt a genuine sense of belonging. A fragile, tentative sprout of a new beginning. As they sat there, talking and laughing as the sky turned a brilliant orange, Naruto's senses suddenly pricked up. It was a fleeting sensation, almost imperceptible. A flicker of the same cold, negative energy he felt from the Grim. But it wasn't coming from the forest. It was coming from inside Beacon's walls. From the direction of the student dorms. It was faint, and it was masked by layers of aura, but it was there. A chilling, familiar malice, hidden behind the face of a student. Kurama's warning echoed in his mind. The enemy was not just outside the gates. It was already inside, and it was watching him. His smile didn't waver, but a new, hard light entered his eyes. He had a new home to protect, and he would let nothing, and no one, threaten it. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Dust. The smell of burnt toast and ozone filled the dorm room. Naruto stood before the automated coffee maker. A look of profound confusion on his face. He had watched the girls use it. They put the brown powder in one part, the water in another, and pressed a button. A simple, three-step process. Yet, his attempt had resulted in a series of angry beeps, a puff of black smoke from the toast slot. He now realized his error, and a puddle of lukewarm, vaguely brown water on the counter. Having a tough time with the dust-powered hot bean water machine. Yang drawled from her bunk, a lazy smirk playing on her lips as she scrolled through her scroll. Don't worry, it takes real skill. You put the coffee grounds in the toaster slot, didn't you? Weiss's voice was muffled from inside the bathroom, a mixture of exasperation and weary resignation. That is the third time this week, Yang, that I've had to remind you not to leave your spare dust cartridges next to the food prep station. RWBY, ever the helpful soul, zipped over to Naruto's side, a whirlwind of red and black. Here, let me show you, she said, quickly and efficiently cleaning up his mess and starting a fresh pot. You have to make sure the gravity dust crystal is properly seated, or it won't cycle the water correctly. Naruto watched her, committing the process to memory. It was just one of 1,000 tiny things that served as a constant reminder that he was an alien here. The technology, the social customs, the very energy that powered their world, it was all foreign. He was a fish out of water, a shinobi in a world without shadows to hide in. He was grateful for these moments of mundane domesticity. They were anchors, keeping him from drifting away on the sea of his own loss. As RWBY explained the intricacies of the coffee maker, Naruto's focus drifted. His senses, honed by years of life or death battles and amplified by sage mode, were always active, always cataloging the world around him. He filtered out the sound of Yang's music, the hum of the lights, the distant chatter from other dorm rooms. He was searching for something else. That faint, cold whisper of negativity he had sensed before. It was still there, a dissonant note in the symphony of Beacon's ambient life. It was like trying to hear a single, wrong key being played in a concert hall miles away. Faint, but persistent, unsettling. So, what's the plan for today, fearless leader? Yang asked, finally swinging out of her bunk and stretching like a cat. Well, RWBY began, pulling out her scroll and tapping on a checklist. We need to get Naruto some proper clothes that aren't borrowed from Blake's mysterious loner collection. And he needs his own supplies. And a weapon. Every huntsman needs a weapon. Her eyes lit up at the very thought, a manic, creative gleam that was both brilliant and slightly terrifying. One thing at a time, RWBY. Weiss interjected, emerging from the bathroom in her immaculate uniform. A custom weapon takes weeks, sometimes months, to forge. For now, basic supplies are the priority. A trip to Vale is in order. And so it was decided. An hour later, the five of them were on a bullhead, soaring over the lush green expanse of the emerald forest towards the sprawling metropolis of Vale. For the girls, it was a routine trip. For Naruto, it was a breathtaking spectacle. The city was a fusion of old-world architecture and futuristic technology. Gleaming glass towers stood beside co-BB-lestone streets and quaint storefronts. Vehicles hovered in designated traffic lanes, and the air was filled with the murmur of 1,000 lives being lived. It was loud, vibrant, and so very different from the wooden simplicity of Konoha. Their first stop was a clothing store. Naruto, used to a practical, unchanging wardrobe of orange and black, was overwhelmed by the sheer variety. The girls took it upon themselves to be his personal stylists, with predictably chaotic results. Yang tried to put him in a leather jacket with flame decals. Weiss insisted on a tailored, formal suit that was utterly impractical. RWBY just kept bringing him anything with a hood. It was Blake who finally found a compromise. She returned from a rack in the back with an outfit that felt right. A pair of durable, dark gray cargo pants, a comfortable black short-sleeved shirt, and over it, a high-collared, zip-up jacket. It was a deep, burnt orange, with black accents along the shoulders and sleeves. It was a clear echo of his old clothes. A nod to the person he had been, but it was new. It was his. "It suits you," Blake said with a small, rare smile as he emerged from the dressing room. He looked in the mirror. A stranger stared back at him. Older than his years, his eyes holding a weight the boy in the reflection shouldn't have to bear. But for the first time, the stranger looked like he belonged. "Thanks, Blake," he said, the words carrying more weight than she knew. Their next stop was a dust shop, from dusk till dawn. The moment Naruto stepped inside, he felt it. A raw, potent energy that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The shop was lined with shelves holding crystals and vials of fine powder, all glowing with an internal light. Red, blue, yellow, purple, a rainbow of elemental power. "Whoa," he breathed, his eyes wide. RWBY was immediately in her element, zipping from shelf to shelf. "This is dust. It's the primary energy source for everything in Remnant. It's what powers our scrolls, our homes, the bullheads. But it can also be weaponized. This is burn, raw fire dust. And this is ice, and this is lightning. You can use it in its raw form, or weave it into your clothes, or use it to create different effects with your ammunition." Her passion was infectious. Naruto picked up a raw, uncut red crystal. It was warm to the touch, pulsing with a wild, untamed energy. It was nothing like the controlled, internal nature of chakra. This was raw, chaotic power, ripped straight from the earth. He could feel its potential, the destructive force barely contained within its crystalline structure. It was fascinating, and deeply dangerous. It was as he was examining a vial of lightning dust that the atmosphere in the shop shifted. The cheerful bell on the door jingled, and A.M. and in a sharp white suit and a bowler hat strode in, flanked by several large men in black suits. The man walked with an air of theatrical arrogance, a lit cigarillo perched in the corner of his mouth. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to find a dust shop open this late?" he asked the elderly shopkeeper, his voice smooth and mocking. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He recognized the man from the snippets of news he'd seen on the dorm's television. Roman Torchwood, a high-profile criminal. One of Roman's thugs slammed a briefcase onto the counter. "We're not here for a debate. Fill it up. All of it." The old man trembled. Naruto glanced at his teammates. Weiss had her hand on the hilt of Murtanaster. Yang's eyes had shifted from lilac to a dangerous red. RWBY was frozen, a look of horrified recognition on her face. And then there was Blake. Her entire body had gone rigid. The black bow on her head twitched, and her amber eyes were wide with a complex emotion Naruto couldn't immediately decipher. It was fear, yes. But it was tangled with something else. A deep, personal anger. And shame. Before anyone could react, another group of men entered the shop. They were dressed differently, in black and white outfits with red accents. And they all wore grim masks. White Fang. Naruto had read about them on his scroll. A faunus rights group that had become increasingly radical, labeled by the kingdoms as a terrorist organization. One of Roman's men shoved the old shopkeeper. "Hurry it up, old man." That was the breaking point. Yang shot forward, a low growl in her throat. "Hey, leave him alone." The shop erupted into chaos. Roman sighed dramatically. gesturing for his men to deal with them. "Well, kids, it's been a slice, but I'm afraid this is where we part ways." A thug lunged at RWBY. Before her scythe was even fully unfolded, Naruto was there. He moved not with a burst of speed, but with a fluid, almost instantaneous shift in position. He didn't punch the man. He simply placed his palm flat against the man's chest. An almost imperceptible pulse of chakra, no more than a gentle push, erupted from his hand. The thug was thrown backward as if hit by a battering ram, slamming into a display case and collapsing in a heap. Another White Fang member swung a sword at him. Naruto sidestepped the clumsy attack, his hand shooting out to grip the man's wrist. He twisted, applying pressure to a nerve cluster. The man yelped and his sword clattered to the floor, his arm going limp and useless. He flowed between them, a phantom in orange and black. It was the same effortless Ikano. Mai of motion he'd displayed against Team CRDL. A jab here, a sweep there. He disabled Roman's men and the White Fang grunts with a calm, surgical precision, never using more force than was absolutely necessary. He was a sheepdog herding a particularly stupid flock of sheep. Roman Torchwood watched, his initial annoyance shifting to genuine intrigue. He took a long drag from his cigarillo, his one visible eye narrowed. This kid wasn't a huntsman. He didn't fight like one. He fought like a professional. Seeing his forces utterly dismantled in under a minute, Roman tipped his hat. "Well, you've certainly been an unexpected delight," he said to Naruto, a smirk playing on his lips. "But I'm on a schedule." He aimed his cane, melodic cudgel, at the ceiling and fired. A flare shot upward, shattering a light fixture. In the ensuing confusion, he and the remaining conscious thugs scrambled out the back door. By the time the dust settled, they were gone. The aftermath was tense. The police arrived, questions were asked, and statements were given. Team RWBY, now including Naruto, were hailed as heroes for stopping the robbery. But the victory felt hollow. Blake hadn't said a word since the fight. She stood apart from the group, her arms wrapped around herself, her gaze fixed on the floor. The trip back to Beacon was suffocatingly quiet. That evening, Naruto found her on the dorm's balcony, staring up at the shattered moon. The wind was cool, and it ruffled her long, black hair. The bow on her head was gone. In its place were two sleek, black cat ears that twitched at his approach. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood beside her, leaning against the railing. He gave her the silence she seemed to need. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice low. "You knew them," he stated. It wasn't a question. "The ones in the grim masks. The White Fang." Blake flinched, her ears flattening against her head. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Your heart rate tripled when they walked in," Naruto continued, his voice gentle but unwavering. He looked at her, his blue eyes holding no judgment, only a deep, empathetic clarity. "Your breathing hitched, your pupils dilated. You weren't just scared of them. You were angry at them. And when you looked at your teammates, you were afraid of what they would think. You were ashamed." His perception was terrifyingly accurate. He wasn't just guessing. He was reading her like a book, laying her bare with his observations. Tears pricked at the corners of her amber eyes. She had spent so long building walls, hiding this vital part of herself. And he had seen through them in a single afternoon. "You can't tell them," she whispered, her voice breaking. "RWBY, Weiss especially, they would hate me." "Why would they hate you?" he asked softly. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Because I was one of them. I was born into the White Fang. Back then, it was different. We were a group dedicated to peace, to creating understanding between humans and faunas. But then our leadership changed. We became what you saw today. A mob. Monsters. I stayed, hoping I could change things from the inside. But I was wrong." Her voice was filled with self-loathing. "I left. I ran away. I came to Beacon to try and start over, to try and atone. But I'm still a coward, hiding what I am." Naruto listened, his expression unchanging. When she finished, a heavy silence fell between them. He thought of his own past. The isolation, the scorn of the villagers. He thought of Sasuke, of his friend who had walked a dark path in the name of a twisted justice. He understood, more than she could possibly know. "My whole life," he began, his voice quiet, drawing her gaze, "people looked at me and saw a monster. They whispered behind my back. They hated me for something I had no control over, something that was sealed inside me before I could even speak. I didn't have a group to fight for me. I was alone." He looked at her, and she saw the echoes of a profound loneliness in his eyes. "Hiding who you are, being afraid of what people will think, that's a heavy burden to carry alone. But your past doesn't make you a monster, Blake. Your choices do. You chose to leave. You chose to fight for others. You chose to be a huntress. That is who you are now." He reached out, not to touch her, but just holding his hand in the space between them. "Your team, they're your friends. They care about you. Give them a chance. The truth might be heavy, but secrets are a poison." Blake stared at him, her amber eyes wide. He wasn't disgusted. He didn't see her as a traitor or a terrorist. He just saw her. And he accepted her. In that moment, the crushing weight she had been carrying for so long seemed to lift, just a little. A small, watery smile touched her lips. A weird name, and weirdly wise. He grinned, his usual bright, easy smile returning. "It's a gift." Later that night, long after the others were asleep, Naruto sat cross-legged on the balcony, meditating. His conversation with Blake had given him a new perspective. The White Fang, Salem, the Grim, this world's conflicts were fueled by hatred and misunderstanding. The same poisons that had plagued his own world. He pushed those thoughts aside, focusing his senses inward, and then outward. He reached out with his sensory abilities, casting a fine net over the entire academy. He pushed past the sleeping auras of the students, searching for that one dissonant frequency, that cold, negative signature. He had felt it spike during their confrontation with Team CRDL. A brief flash of intense, hateful energy from Cardin Winchester. But it was more than just the bully's own pathetic malice. It was something else, something deeper. Tonight, it was stronger, more active. He followed the thread of cold energy through the walls of Beacon, past the dorms of other teams, until he found its source. Team CRDL's room. He focused, honing in on the signature. It was clinging to Cardin like a parasite, a faint, dark shimmer around the boy's own aura. It felt hungry, it felt ancient, and it felt exactly like the soulless, negative energy of the Grim he'd fought in the forest. Naruto's eyes snapped open, a cold, hard certainty settling in his gut. The enemy wasn't just at the gates. It wasn't a hidden ideology or a secret organization. It was a tangible evil, and it was sleeping just a few doors down the hall. The war in the shadows Ozpin had spoken of was far closer than he had ever imagined. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Parasite of Prejudice. Sleep offered little respite. Naruto found himself adrift in a sea of fractured memories. The acrid taste of smoke and blood from the Fourth Great Ninja War, the chilling, hollow gaze of Kagaya, the feeling of being torn atom from atom. He would wake with a gasp, the sterile white ceiling of the dorm room a stark, unwelcome reality. The shattered moon was a constant, silent accusation in the night sky. He was untethered. His waking hours were plagued by a different kind of phantom. A cold, insidious whisper at the edge of his senses. It was the energy signature he had locked onto, the one clinging to Cardin Winchester like a shroud of grave dirt. He had spent 2 days observing the bully, a silent shadow in the bustling halls of Beacon. To everyone else, Cardin was the same arrogant brute he'd always been. But to Naruto's senses, the change was palpable. The malice that rolled off him was no longer just the petty cruelty of a schoolyard tyrant. It had a sharper, hungrier edge. When Cardin shoved a younger student against a locker, Naruto saw the dark energy flare, a brief, violent pulse of satisfaction. When he mocked Velvet Scarlatina, a shy faunus girl with rabbit ears, pulling on them until she cried out in pain. The energy seemed to feed, growing infinitesimally stronger. It was a parasite, and Cardin's prejudice was its nourishment. The worst part was the subtlety. A flicker of red in the bully's eyes. Too quick for a normal person to catch. A slight, unnatural deepening of his voice when he snarled an insult. Small things. Wrong things. He knew he couldn't ignore it. This wasn't just a case of bullying. It was an infection, and if left unchecked, he had no doubt it would fester into something far more dangerous. The time for solo observation was over. He needed his team. He found them in their room that evening. A rare moment of quiet study. RWBY was sketching weapon designs in a notebook, Weiss was reviewing lean reports on her scroll, Yang was polishing her gauntlets, and Blake was, as always, lost in a book. The air was peaceful, domestic. Naruto hated that he had to be the one to shatter it. He stood in the middle of the room, and the simple act of his stillness drew their attention. He didn't speak until all four of them were looking at him, their expressions ranging from RWBY's open curiosity to Weiss's impatient questioning. "It's Carden," Naruto said, his voice low and serious, devoid of its usual warmth. "There's something wrong with him. Something attached to him." He explained what he had sensed, what he had seen. He described the cold, grim-like energy, how it flared when Carden indulged in cruelty, how it seemed to be influencing him, making him more aggressive, more hateful. He chose his words carefully, trying to ground the fantastical nature of his claim in his direct observations. Weiss was the first to react, just as he knew she would be. She set her scroll down with a sharp click, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of supreme skepticism. "A grim parasite," she scoffed. "Naruto, with all due respect, that is the most absurd thing I have ever heard. There is no known grim species with the ability to possess a human. It's biologically impossible. Carden is a troglodyte and a bully. He doesn't need a phantom to make him act that way." "I'd normally agree with the Ice Queen," Yang chimed in, setting Ember Celica aside. "Carden's a jerk, plain and simple. But," she looked at Naruto, her lilac eyes thoughtful, "you took him and his whole team down without breaking a sweat. You sense things none of us can. If you say something's off, I'm inclined to believe you. But what could we even do?" RWBY asked, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "If he's really infected, do we tell Professor Ozpin? Do we fight him?" The room fell into a tense silence. The four of them looking to each other, a schism of belief forming between them. It was Blake who broke the stalemate. She closed her book softly and stood up, her amber eyes fixed on Weiss. "We saw what Naruto did in the forest," she said, her voice quiet but firm, commanding their attention. "We felt his power in Ozpin's office. His abilities are beyond our understanding. Why is it so hard to believe his senses are as well?" She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "Weiss, I know you rely on facts and logic. But I've seen what hatred can do to a person. I saw it twist the white fang from a peaceful movement into an army of monsters. It's a poison. Maybe what Naruto is sensing is just a more literal form of that same poison." Her words, spoken from a place of painful experience, struck a chord. Weiss's rigid posture softened slightly. She looked at Naruto, at the absolute certainty in his blue eyes, and then at Blake, at the quiet conviction in hers. She let out a frustrated sigh. "Fine," she conceded. "Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you're right. We can't act on your feelings, Naruto. I need proof. One shred of tangible, irrefutable evidence that what's happening with Carden is more than just bad behavior." Naruto nodded. "Fair enough. Then we'll get you your proof." The plan was simple. They would tail Carden, waiting for the parasite to show its hand. Blake's natural stealth and Naruto's shinobi training made them the obvious choice for the reconnaissance team. That afternoon, they found their opportunity. They followed RDIN and his cronies as they left the main academy building, heading towards the more secluded training courtyards. They moved like ghosts, Naruto keeping to the shadows while Blake used the architecture to her advantage. Flitting from pillar to pillar, they watched as Team CRDL cornered their favorite target, the soft-spoken, rabbit-eared Faunus, Velvet Scarlatina. Well, look what we have here," Carden sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "If it isn't the freak." Velvet flinched, clutching a small, unassuming box to her chest. "Leave me alone, Carden." "What's in the box, freak?" one of his teammates taunted. Reaching for it. "Don't touch it," Velvet cried, trying to pull away. Carden grabbed her arm, his grip unnaturally tight. "I think you owe us an apology for being a filthy Faunus," he snarled. And then Naruto saw it. A faint, oily black mist, almost invisible to the naked eye, seeped from Carden's pores, swirling around his arm. His knuckles were white, and his eyes, for a split second, they glowed with a malevolent, ruby red light. He shoved her. It wasn't a simple push. He threw her, sending her flying several feet through the air. She slammed into a stone pillar with a sickening crack, the box flying from her hands and skittering across the ground. She collapsed, sobbing. Hidden in the shadows, Blake gasped, her hands clenched into fists. But it was Naruto who acted. He didn't charge in. He simply stepped out of the shadows, placing himself between Carden and the crying girl. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a silent, immovable object. His presence was so sudden, so absolute, that Team CRDL froze. "What do you want, Uzumaki?" Carden growled, taking a step back. The red glow in his eyes was gone, but the dark energy still clung to him. He was trying to project confidence. But Naruto could sense the flicker of fear underneath. It wasn't Naruto he was afraid of. It was the memory of the effortless, humiliating defeat in Glinda's classroom. Naruto didn't look at him. His gaze was on Velvet. He knelt down, picked up her box, and handed it to her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and nodded mutely. He then turned to Carden, and his blue eyes were as cold and hard as chips of ice. "Leave her alone," he said. It wasn't a request, it was a command. The sheer, unshakable authority in his voice made the four bullies take another involuntary step back. "Or what?" Carden blustered, trying to regain control. Naruto smiled, but it was a chilling, humorless expression. "You really don't want to find out." For a long, tense moment, the courtyard was silent. Then, with a frustrated roar, Carden turned and stalked away, his team scrambling to follow. They had lost this round. Blake emerged from her hiding place, rushing to Velvet's side along with the rest of Team RWBY, who had been watching from a safe distance. Weiss's face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. His eyes, they glowed, she whispered. All her skepticism obliterated by what she had just witnessed. And the way he threw her, his aura didn't even flare. That was raw strength, unnatural strength. She looked at Naruto, her expression a mixture of awe and horror. "You were right." They helped Velvet to the infirmary and then retreated to their dorm to form a new plan. The atmosphere was grim. "We can't just go to Ozpin," Blake said, pacing the room. "They'll treat Carden like a criminal, or worse, a lab rat. He's a monster." "But, what you said, Naruto, he's a victim, too." "So what's the plan?" Yang asked, cracking her knuckles. "Do we beat the ghost out of him?" "Something like that," Naruto said, drawing their attention. He sat on the floor, a thoughtful expression on his face. "This thing, this parasite, it's made of pure negative energy. Like the Grim, it's feeding on Carden's hate. The opposite of that is life energy. Positive energy. In my world, we call it natural energy. I can use it. I think I can force the parasite out of him." "Force it out? How?" Ruby asked, her eyes wide. "I need to connect my chakra directly to his system," Naruto explained. "But to do that, his own defenses have to be down. His aura needs to be weak, close to breaking. And he needs to be physically exhausted, so his body can't fight the process." A slow, dangerous grin spread across Yang's face. "So, we do get to beat him up." "Not beat him up," Weiss corrected, her mind already working through the tactical possibilities. "We neutralize him. It has to be a coordinated effort. We disarm him, we exhaust him, we break his aura. We can't afford to seriously injure him in the process." The plan was set. They would corner him that night in the same courtyard, under the light of the shattered moon. As dusk fell, they took their positions. The air was cold, the silence of the courtyard amplifying the tension. Carden arrived, alone, apparently drawn there by a faked message from one of his mates that RWBY had sent from a burner scroll. "All right, where are you?" he called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Right here," Yang said, stepping out of the shadows, her gauntlets primed. Carden spun around, his hand flying to the hilt of his mace. The rest of Team RWBY emerged, surrounding him. He was trapped. "What is this?" he demanded, his eyes darting between them. "Think of it as an intervention," Blake said coolly, her hand on the hilt of Gamble's shroud. A switch flipped in Carden's eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. The parasite was taking control. The black mist, now thicker and more visible, began to leak from his skin. You'll regret this, he roared, his voice a guttural snarl, and charged at Yang. The fight was a blur of controlled chaos. Yang met his charge head-on, her explosive shells rocking him back, but he was stronger, faster than he should have been. He swung his mace with a wild, brutal force that she was hard-pressed to dodge. RWBY zipped in from the side, a red blur, her scythe hooking his leg and pulling him off balance. Before he could recover, Weiss's glyphs snapped into existence beneath his feet, a black circle of gravitational energy that held him in place for a precious second. It wasn't long enough. With a roar of fury, he shattered the glyph with a stomp of his boot, the shockwave cracking the pavement. Blake used her ribbon, wrapping it around his mace and yanking it from his grasp. Disarmed, he became even more feral, lashing out with his fists. He fought like a cornered animal, with no technique, only brute force. The girls were masterful, a whirlwind of coordinated strikes and evasions. They weren't trying to win. They were a tide, eroding the mountain of his strength and aura. Finally, after several minutes of relentless, overwhelming pressure, he stumbled. His aura flickered and shattered like broken glass, and he fell to one knee, panting, exhausted. Now, Weiss shouted. The dark energy surged, enveloping Cardin completely. His head snapped up, and his eyes were no longer his own. They were solid pools of glowing red. A low, raspy voice, ancient and full of hate, slithered from his lips. Fools! This vessel is mine. Naruto stepped forward, the ground silent beneath his feet. He closed his eyes for a second, drawing on the faint, sparse natural energy of Remnant. It was like trying to drink from a dried-up well. But it was enough. Orange pigmentation appeared around his eyes, and his pupils shifted into the horizontal bars of the Toad Sage. He wasn't just Naruto anymore. He was a conduit for the world's life force. He moved with a speed that made RWBY's semblance look like a casual stroll. He was in front of Cardin in an instant, his palm pressed firmly against the bully's forehead. Begone! The parasite shrieked through Cardin's mouth. No, Naruto said, his voice calm and powerful, resonating with natural energy. You are golden. Sun-warm chakra flooded from his hand into Cardin's body. It was not a violent force, but an inexorable tide of pure, positive life. It met the cold, hateful energy of the parasite, and the effect was instantaneous. The black mist was repelled, torn from Cardin's very soul. It screamed, a sound that was felt more than heard, a high-pitched vibration of pure agony. The mist was violently ejected from Cardin's mouth and nose, coalescing in the air before him. It formed a writhing, shadowy creature, no bigger than a cat, with dozens of spindly legs and a single, glowing red eye. A Geist. Before the creature could even orient itself, Naruto's other hand came up. A swirling sphere of blue chakra already formed in his palm. He didn't shout its name. He simply pushed the Rasengan forward, engulfing the shrieking Geist. There was a brief, violent implosion of energy, and then, nothing. The creature was gone, utterly and completely annihilated. Cardin Winchester collapsed, unconscious. The air in the courtyard was still. He only sounded the heavy breathing of Team RWBY. A slow, deliberate clapping echoed from the shadows. Professor Ozpin stepped into the moonlight, Glinda Goodwitch at his side. He took a sip from his ever-present mug, his expression unreadable. A masterful performance, he said, his eyes fixed on Naruto. Though I must admit, I did not expect an exorcism. Glinda rushed to Cardin's side, checking his vitals. He's alive, weak, but stable. What in the world was that thing? A particularly insidious form of Geist, Ozpin explained, his gaze never leaving Naruto. One that does not possess objects, but people. It latches onto a host with strong negative emotions, fear, anger, prejudice, and amplifies them, feeding on the darkness until it can take complete control. He took another sip of his coffee. We have theories, ancient texts that speak of such things, but we have never encountered one so subtle, so intelligent. He finally looked at the four girls, who were staring at him, wide-eyed. You all showed remarkable restraint and teamwork. You saved a fellow student's life tonight. 10 points to Gryffindor. He offered a wry smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His gaze returned to Naruto, and it was filled with a chilling gravity. Your arrival on Remnant may have been an accident, Mr. Uzumaki, Ozpin said, his voice low. But your ability to perceive and combat this specific threat is not. This was not a random attack. It was a test, a weapon being deployed, and intelligence is guiding the Grimm, turning them from a mindless force of nature into an army of infiltration and terror. He took a step closer, the moonlight glinting off his spectacles. You are no longer just a student here. You are a necessity, and I fear the war you left behind may have just followed you here. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Fallen Leaf. The walk back to Ozpin's office was a silent, grim procession. The adrenaline of the fight had evaporated, leaving behind a residue of cold dread. Cardin had been taken to the infirmary under the pretense of a training accident, a flimsy cover story that felt like a paper shield against a coming storm. Naruto walked at the center of the group, the four girls of Team RWBY forming a protective, if unspoken, diamond around him. He could feel their gazes, their thoughts a swirling vortex of awe, fear, and 1,000 unanswered questions. They had seen him wield a power that defied every law of their world, an energy that could heal as easily as it could obliterate. He wasn't just their mysterious new teammate anymore. He was an unknown quantity, a living weapon whose true potential they had only just glimpsed. The clockwork tower was the same as before, the gears turning with a quiet, inexorable rhythm, indifferent to the chaos that had just unfolded below. Ozpin was already behind his desk, a fresh mug of something hot steaming in his hands. Glinda stood by the window, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of stern concern. The comfortable, academic atmosphere of the office now felt like the command center of a hidden war. Please, have a seat, Ozpin said, his voice calm, but the usual twinkle in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary gravity. Though I doubt any of us will be resting easy tonight. They remained standing. Weiss was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp with a new, frantic need for answers. Professor, what was that thing? You called it a Geist, but I've never read about any Grimm with the ability to possess a person. Our knowledge of the Grimm is extensive. Something like this, it shouldn't exist. Ozpin took a slow sip from his mug, his eyes sweeping over each of their faces before finally settling on Naruto. Our knowledge, Miss Schnee, is what I have chosen for it to be. What the world believes it to be. The truth is far more complicated, and far more dangerous. He set his mug down with a soft click that echoed in the silent room. For centuries, humanity has fought the Grimm. We see them as a force of nature, a mindless tide of darkness. But that is a lie. A comforting lie we tell ourselves so that we can sleep at night. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. The Grimm are not mindless. They are a weapon, and they have a master. An intelligent, immortal, and malevolent queen who has waged a secret war against humanity since the dawn of time. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. Ruby gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Yang's casual bravado vanished, replaced by a look of stone-cold shock. Blake's cat ears flattened against her hair, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Even Weiss, for all her composure, took a half step back, her mind struggling to process a truth that fundamentally broke her understanding of the world. Her name is Salem, Ozpin continued, his voice a low, somber murmur. She resides in the land of darkness, a continent twisted and corrupted by her very presence, the birthplace of all Grimm. What you fought tonight was one of her newer creations. An experiment, a tool of infiltration designed to turn us against each other, to rot our kingdoms from the inside out by amplifying the very negativity she feeds upon. He turned his gaze fully to Naruto, and for the first time, Naruto saw past the calm, calculating headmaster. He saw an ancient, tired soldier, a man who had been fighting this war for longer than anyone could imagine. Your arrival here, Mr. Uzumaki, was an anomaly she could not have predicted, Ozpin said. Your chakra, this natural energy you wield, it is anathema to her. It is a light in a world she seeks to drown in darkness. You didn't just expel that Geist. You annihilated it on a fundamental level, in a way our weapons and even our aura cannot. You are the one variable in a war one have been fighting. And losing, for lifetimes. The weight of his words settled on Naruto's shoulders, a familiar, crushing burden. A new world, a new war, but the role was the same. He was the key, the linchpin, the one who had to stand against the coming night. So what now? Yang asked, her voice strained. Do we tell everyone? The councils? The armies? Absolutely not, Glinda said, speaking for the first time. Her tone leaving no room for debate. The panic would be catastrophic. Our unity is fragile enough as it is. If the world knew the Grimm were being guided by an intelligent master, our fear would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We would be choked by the very monsters we were trying to fight. Then we fight, Ruby said, her voice small but filled with a sudden, fierce resolve. She looked at her teammates, her silver eyes burning. Like you said, Professor. We're huntsmen and huntresses. It's our job to protect people. This is just a bigger monster. A faint, sad smile touched Ozpin's lips. It is, at that, Miss Rose. Which is why I must ask more of you than I have ever asked of any student. He stood and walked around the desk, stopping before them. I cannot fight this war in the open. But I can create a scalpel to cut out the infection before it spreads. Team RWBY, and you, Naruto, I am asking you to be that scalpel. He was giving them a choice. But it wasn't really a choice at all. They all knew it. They had been chosen, by fate or by chance, to stand on the front lines of a war nobody else knew existed. Your official duties as students will continue, Ozpin explained. But you will also undertake special assignments, directly from me. You will investigate strange occurrences, hunt down these new forms of Grimm, and be my eyes and ears. You are no longer just students training to fight monsters. You are soldiers, spies, the first and last line of defense for a world that cannot know it is in peril. The five of them exchanged a look. A silent consensus passed between them. It was terrifying. It was insane. But they were in this together. Naruto gave a single, sharp nod. We'll do it. The journey back to the dorm was a world away from the one they had taken to the office. The silence was no longer tense, but heavy, laden with the shared burden of their new reality. When the door clicked shut behind them, it felt they were sealing themselves off from the rest of the world, creating a sanctuary where the truth was allowed to exist. For a long moment, nobody moved. The weight of it all seemed to paralyze them. Then, Yang let out a long, shaky breath and collapsed onto her bed. A mortal evil queen, sentient monster parasites, secret war for the fate of the world, she recited, staring at the ceiling. Well, no one can say Beacon is boring. Her attempt at humor was thin, brittle. Ruby sat beside her, hugging her knees to her chest. What if we're not strong enough? She whispered, the question directed at no one and everyone. Naruto looked at the four of them, seeing the cracks beginning to show in their armor. Yang's bravado, Weiss's composure, Blake's stoicism, Ruby's optimism, all of it was being tested. He thought of his own Team 7. Of the trials that had forged and nearly broken them. He knew this feeling. The moment after the truth hits, when the path forward seems impossibly steep. He walked over to the coffee maker. And this time, he performed the steps flawlessly. The quiet gurgle of the machine was a strangely comforting sound in the tense silence. He didn't know what to say, what grand, heroic speech to give. He wasn't that person anymore. The war had taught him that words were cheap. Action, presence, that's what mattered. So he made coffee. He handed a mug to each of them. A simple, grounding gesture. As Weiss took hers, her fingers brushed against his. Her hand was trembling. She looked up at him, her icy blue eyes filled with a storm of emotions she couldn't articulate. Her entire, logical, fact-based world had been upended. Your sage mode, she began, her voice clinical, precise, as if she could regain control by categorizing the impossible. The markings on your eyes. The immense increase in your sensory abilities and physical strength. Is that a function of your chakra? It's a function of natural energy, Naruto corrected gently, sitting on the floor in the center of the room. I draw energy from the world itself, from the earth, the air, life, and blend it with my own chakra. It's a perfect balance of spiritual, physical, and natural forces. Incredible, she breathed, her mind racing. The applications are limitless. It's a power source completely independent of dust. If we could replicate it. You can't, Naruto said, not unkindly. It requires a massive amount of chakra to even attempt to control. And if you take in too much, or the balance is wrong, he let the sentence hang, remembering the stone statues of the shinobi who had failed. Weiss fell silent, but she didn't stop looking at him. Her gaze was no longer skeptical. It was one of intense, profound respect. He was a living miracle, a scientific impossibility she was determined to understand. Blake, who had been standing by the window, turned to face him, her book forgotten on her bed. "When you touched Cardin," she said, her voice soft, "I felt it. Even from a distance. It was warm, peaceful, the opposite of the grim. Is that what your world was like? Full of that energy?" The simple question struck him harder than any physical blow. He thought of the vibrant, thrumming life of the forests around Konoha. The sheer spiritual density of the world he had lost. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with a sudden, aching nostalgia. It was. A silence fell between them, a shared moment of understanding. Blake saw him not just as a powerhouse, but as a refugee, a man who had lost his entire world, a pain she could comprehend through the lens of her own self-imposed exile. She walked over and sat down on the floor near him, a silent offering of solidarity. Yang finally pushed herself up, the tension in her shoulders coiling into a restless energy. "Enough moping," she declared, though her voice lacked its usual force. "All this talk of secret wars and evil queens is giving me a headache. What I need is to hit something." She looked at Naruto, a challenge sparking in her now lilac eyes. "You and me, Blondie, training room, right now, no holding back. I want to see what you've really got." It wasn't just a challenge. It was her way of coping, of confronting the overwhelming new reality by turning it into something physical, something she could fight. Naruto looked at her, then gave a slow, tired smile. "All right, but if you break anything, Weiss is paying for it." "Hey," Weiss protested, but there was no heat in it. A flicker of life was returning to the room. The training room was deserted at this late hour. Yang stood on one side of the arena, her lilac eyes blazing. Ember Celica primed on her fists. Naruto stood opposite, his new orange jacket zipped up, his stance relaxed. "Ready when you are," he said. Yang didn't waste a second. She launched herself forward, propelled by a blast from her gauntlets, her fist aimed at his face. It was a move that would have flattened any other student. Naruto simply tilted his head to the side, the gale force of her punch ruffling his hair as it passed harmlessly by his ear. He didn't retaliate. He just watched. She spun, firing another blast for momentum, her legs sweeping around in a powerful arc. He dropped to one knee, the kick whistling over his head. She was a whirlwind of explosive force, a flurry of punches, kicks, and shotgun blasts that filled the air with the smell of cordite. And Naruto moved through it like a leaf on the wind. He never took a step back. He simply flowed, his body moving with an impossible grace, always just outside the arc of her attacks. He wasn't just dodging, he was reading her, anticipating her every move before she even made it. "Stop dodging and fight back," she roared in frustration, her hair beginning to glow with the force of her semblance. "All right," he said. He waited for her next punch. As her fist flew towards him, he didn't dodge. He moved inside her guard. His hand shot out, not to block, but to gently cup her elbow. With a flick of his wrist, he redirected the entire force of her punch, sending her stumbling off balance. Before she could recover, he tapped 2 fingers against her shoulder. It was a light touch, almost casual, but it sent a jolt through her nervous system that made her entire arm go numb. She stared at him, stunned. He hadn't hurt her. He had simply turned her off. "How? You rely too much on power," he said, his voice calm and instructional. "Your attacks are strong, but they're wide. You leave yourself open. A fight isn't about who can hit the hardest. It's about control. Control of yourself, and control of your opponent." Yang's frustration melted away, replaced by a grudging awe. She shook her arm, the feeling slowly returning. A wide, genuine grin spread across her face. "Okay," she said, settling back into a fighting stance. "Teach me." The fight continued, but it was no longer a fight. It was a lesson, a dance. He would let her attack, then show her the weakness, the opening she had created. He taught her about leverage, about using an opponent's momentum against them, about the delicate art of unbalancing a foe. For the first time, Yang was fighting with her head, not just her fists. It was exhilarating. Finally, panting and drenched in sweat, she called a halt. Okay, I give, she said, laughing. You win. I think you've made your point. She walked over to him, her usual swagger back in full force, and playfully punched his shoulder. Thanks for the lesson, sensei. There was a charge in the air between them, an energy born of respect and the raw, physical intimacy of combat. She was a connection forged in a language she understood better than any other. Back in the dorm, they found RWBY waiting up for them. Blake and Weiss had gone to bed, but the young leader was sitting at the small table, a steaming bowl of instant noodles in front of Naruto's spot. I figured you'd be hungry, she said, her silver eyes soft with concern. It's not as good as the stuff from home, but it's warm. Naruto sat down, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He looked at the simple meal, and for a moment, he wasn't at Beacon. He was a lonely kid in a small, empty apartment, the smell of cheap ramen his only companion. But then he looked up at RWBY, at her earnest, worried face, and the loneliness receded. Thanks, RWBY, he said, his voice quiet. He picked up the chopsticks and began to eat. She watched him, a small frown on her face. Does it ever get easier? She asked. Carrying all that, knowing the whole world is counting on you. Naruto paused, his chopsticks hovering over the bowl. He thought of Jiraiya, of his master's last words. He thought of the heavy cloak of the Hokage he had been destined to wear. No, he said honestly. It never gets easier. You just get stronger, and you learn that you don't have to carry it alone. He looked at her, and then gestured around the quiet room. You find people to help you carry the load. A small, grateful smile bloomed on RWBY's face. In that moment, she wasn't just looking at a hero. She was looking at a friend. Someone who understood the burden of a leader's heart. Later, as he lay on his pallet, the exhaustion was too deep even for dreams. The room was dark, the only light the cold, broken gaze of the moon. He heard a soft rustling. He opened his eyes to see 4 figures standing over him. RWBY, Weiss, Blake, and Yang. They each held a pillow and a blanket. The floor is cold, Weiss stated, as if it were an undeniable scientific fact. And you're one of us now, Yang added with a soft grin. We don't let team members sleep on the floor. It's illogical, Blake murmured, a hint of a smile on her lips. Given the available space. So, scoot over, RWBY finished, already pushing his pallet closer to the center of the room. Without another word, they laid their own blankets and pillows down on the floor around him, creating a large, impromptu nest. They settled in, a silent circle of warmth and presence. It wasn't planned. It wasn't discussed. It was a simple, unspoken declaration. You are not alone. We are here. Naruto lay there, in the center of it all, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the 4 girls who had, in the span of a few short weeks, become his anchor in this strange, broken world. He thought of the cold, empty apartment of his childhood. He thought of the loss, the war, the pain that had followed him across dimensions. A single, hot tear escaped the corner of his eye and traced a path down his temple. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of profound, aching relief. He had lost his home. But as he closed his eyes, surrounded by the quiet strength of his new team, his new family, he realized he might have just found another one. Far away, in RWBY, Dian Castle in the heart of the Land of Darkness, Salem watched a swirling image in her black scrying pool. The image flickered, showing her the face of a blonde-haired boy with eyes as blue as a summer sky. She saw a flash of golden light, the symbol of a toad sage, and the utter, annihilating erasure of her Geist. A long, elegant finger with a black, sharpened nail tapped against the edge of the pool. Her seer grim had failed to give her a clear picture of the boy's arrival, but this was different. This was a direct confrontation. A power she had never encountered, from a place beyond her sight. It was not of this world. It was not born of the 2 foolish brothers who had abandoned it. Interesting, Salem purred, a slow, cruel smile spreading across her pale face. The grim around her throne room seemed to shrink back from the sudden, intense spike of her malevolent curiosity. A new player had entered the game. One who did not play by the rules. The world had just become infinitely more fragile. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Shadow of the Mountain. The first snow of winter had begun to fall on Vale, dusting the spires of Beacon in a thin layer of white. A fragile peace had settled over Team RWBY's dorm room in the weeks following the confrontation with the Geist. It was a peace born not of ignorance, but of shared purpose. The knowledge of Salem, of the secret war, was a heavy cloak they all wore. But they had learned to bear its weight together. Their dorm had become an island, a sanctuary where the truth could be spoken and strategies formed. Their nights had found a new, unspoken rhythm. The floor nest, born of a single act of solidarity, was now a permanent fixture. After the day's classes and training, they would push the furniture to the walls and create their shared space. It was a silent testament to their bond, a circle of warmth against the creeping cold of the world outside. Their training had changed, too. It was no longer about sparring for points in Glinda's class. It was about survival. Naruto had become their reluctant sensei, his lessons brutal, efficient, and transformative. He moved through their sessions like a force of nature, his cheeks as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. He taught Yang to channel her explosive power into controlled, devastating strikes, to fight with her head as much as her fists. He forced Weiss out of her rigid, textbook forms, teaching her to improvise, to use her glyphs not just as platforms and shields, but as weapons, traps, and tools of misdirection. He sparred with Blake for hours on end, breaking her habit of retreating into the shadows, honing her into a blade that could fight in the open, her every move a seamless flow between offense and defense. And with RWBY, the youngest of them, he was perhaps the most demanding. He taught her how to be a leader when her speed was not an option, how to command a battlefield with her voice and her mind, not just the sweep of her scythe. He was breaking them down and rebuilding them, piece by piece, into something stronger. Something ready for the war that was coming. The call came on a Tuesday morning, a crisp, cold summons to the Clockwork Tower. The five of them stood before Ozpin's desk, the mood in the room as gray and heavy as the winter sky outside. "Good morning," Ozpin began, his voice devoid of its usual cryptic warmth. He gestured to a holographic map that shimmered into existence above his desk. It showed the Kingdom of Vale, with a small, remote area near the southeastern coast highlighted in red. "This is the village of Xian. Or rather, this is where it used to be. 3 days ago, all communications from Xian ceased. A trade caravan that was due to arrive yesterday found the village completely deserted. There were no signs of a struggle, no bodies, no blood. The entire population of nearly 200 people has simply vanished." Glinda Goodwitch stood by the window, her expression grim. "The local population has spiked threefold in the last 48 hours. The entire region is crawling with them. A standard huntsman team sent to investigate was forced to retreat after suffering heavy casualties. This is not a training exercise," Ozpin said, his gaze meeting each of theirs in turn. "This has all the hallmarks of a new strategy from our enemy. I need you to go to Xian, infiltrate the village, assess the situation, and discover the cause of the disappearances. Do not engage any large grim forces unless absolutely necessary. Your priority is reconnaissance. Find out what happened to those people. And find out what Salem is planning." The bullhead ride to the coast was a study in tension. Weiss had her scroll out, furiously analyzing grim migration patterns and topographical maps, trying to impose logic on an illogical situation. Yang was unnervingly quiet, endlessly loading and unloading a shell into Ember Celica, the rhythmic clicks the only sound she made. RWBY, a small frown of concentration on her face, was double-checking their equipment, her movements sharp and precise. She was shouldering the mantle of leadership, and its weight was evident in the serious set of her jaw. Naruto sat beside Blake, his eyes closed, his hands resting on his knees. He wasn't sleeping. He was reaching out with his senses, feeling the world shift as they flew further from the protective aura of Vale. The natural energy of the world was growing thin, choked by a rising tide of negativity. It felt like a disease, a creeping sickness spreading through the land. "What do you feel?" Blake asked, her voice a low murmur that only he could hear. "Despair," Naruto answered without opening his eyes. "It's thick, like a blanket. Something is wrong down there. Terribly wrong." They arrived to a scene of profound, chilling stillness. The village of Xian was nestled in a small valley, a collection of quaint stone and wood houses now painted in the muted grays of the overcast sky. A light snow was falling, covering everything in a pristine, white shroud that seemed to muffle all sound. There was no smoke from the chimneys. No children playing in the single, muddy street. No life. It was exactly as Ozpin had described. Food was left half-eaten on tables. A child's toy lay abandoned in a doorway. Laundry, now frozen stiff, still hung on a line, swaying gently in the cold breeze. It was a town of ghosts. A place where time had simply stopped. Spread out, RWBY commanded, her voice a hushed whisper that was somehow still firm. 2-person teams. Check every building. Report anything unusual. Young, you're with me. Weiss, Blake, Naruto, you patrol the perimeter. Your senses are the best early warning we've got. Naruto nodded, melting into the shadows at the edge of the village. He moved with a silent, practiced grace, his feet making no sound on the snow-covered ground. His sage senses were screaming at him. The despair he had felt from the air was a palpable miasma here, clinging to the walls. Pooling in the empty houses. It was a psychic poison, designed to crush the will, to foster hopelessness. This wasn't the aftermath of a grim attack. This was the attack. He completed a full circuit of the village. The forest was unnervingly quiet, but the sheer number of negative signatures lurking just beyond the tree line was staggering. They were waiting, being held in reserve. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was a trap. His calm crackled to life. Naruto, it's Blake. Weiss and I have found something. In the town square. You need to see this. He was there in seconds. Appearing beside them like a phantom. In the center of the square, where a fountain or a statue should have been, was something else. It was a pulsating, tumorous growth of black, crystalline thorns. Half buried in the cobblestones. It was roughly the size of a carriage, and it seemed to pulse with a faint, dark light, a sickening rhythm like a diseased heart. Veins of the same black crystal spread out from it, cracking the stones, burrowing into the earth like roots. It's a grim, Weiss breathed, her hand gripping the hilt of Mertenaster. But I've never seen anything like it. It's growing. Naruto approached it cautiously. The wave of despair emanating from the growth was immense, a physical force that pressed in on him. This was the source, a psychic beacon, broadcasting pure, crippling fear. It hadn't killed the villagers. It had broken their spirits, driven them out of the safety of their homes and into the jaws of the waiting Grim. It's a lure, he said, his voice grim. And we just took the bait. As the words left his mouth, the grim heart pulsed violently. A low, resonant hum filled the air, and the ground began to tremble. From the shadows of the alleyways, from the darkness of the empty houses, from the very earth beneath their feet, they emerged. They were sleek, panther-like creatures made of solidified shadow, with glowing, multifaceted red eyes and long, whip-like tails. They moved with a liquid grace, their forms seeming to flicker and dissolve at the edges. What are those things? RWBY's voice crackled over the comms as she and Young were suddenly surrounded. New plan. Naruto yelled into his mic, his eyes locked on the shadowy beasts. Everyone, fall back to the square. We fight here. But before they could consolidate, a figure dropped from the rooftops, landing silently between Naruto and the grim heart. He was a man, dressed in dark, practical gear, a gray cloak covering his shoulders. His face was sharp, angular, with the cold, dead eyes of a zealot. In his hands, he held a pair of wicked-looking, serrated knives that glowed faintly with lightning dust. I must admit, the man said, his voice calm, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. I didn't expect Ozpin to send his best and brightest new toy. Salem will be most pleased. Young, RWBY, and Weiss were fighting for their lives. The new Grim, the Stalkers, were a nightmare. They would lunge, and then dissolve into a patch of shadow on the ground, only to reform right behind them for a strike. They were impossible to track, their attacks coming from all directions at once. They're phasing, Weiss shouted, narrowly avoiding a claw that materialized from her own shadow. Our attacks are going right through them. Back in the square, Naruto and Blake faced the new arrival. Who are you? Naruto demanded. My name is Silas, the man replied, a thin, pitying smile on his lips. And I am a harbinger of the world's salvation. Humanity is a disease, a festering wound upon this planet. Salem offers the cure, a return to silence, to peace. He was a former huntsman. Naruto could see it in his stance, in the way he held his dust-infused blades. But his aura, it was tainted, corrupted by the same dark energy as the Grimm around them. Silas lunged, not at Naruto, but at Blake. He was impossibly fast, his knives a blur of crackling energy. Blake met his attack, Gamble shroud a flash of black steel. The clang of their weapons echoed in the dead village. Silas was good. He fought with a cold, brutal efficiency, forcing Blake onto the defensive. Naruto moved to intercept, but Silas was a master of guerrilla tactics. He tossed a small pellet to the ground, which erupted in a cloud of thick, black smoke. His senses were useless, the smoke fused with a dust that choked out sound and smell. Naruto felt a sharp pain in his side as a knife, thrown blindly through the smoke, grazed his ribs. This was a different kind of fight. This wasn't a beast of mindless rage. This was an intelligent, dedicated killer. We can't win like this. Blake grunted, parrying another vicious strike from Silas. The stalkers are picking the others apart, and this thing, it's making them stronger. She was right. The Grimm heart was pulsing faster now, its negative energy empowering the stalkers, making them phase faster, hit harder. They had to cut off the head. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He looked past Silas, at the pulsating black heart. There was only one way. He caught Blake's eye, a silent communication passing between them in a split second. Buy me time. She understood immediately. With a fierce cry, she launched herself at Silas, not to defeat him, but simply to occupy him. She abandoned all defense, her attacks becoming a wild, desperate flurry, forcing Silas to focus his full attention on her. Foolish girl, Silas snarled, sidestepping a slash and driving his knee into her stomach. Blake gasped, but she used the momentum to wrap her ribbon around his arm, pulling him off balance for a crucial half-second. It was all Naruto needed. He closed his eyes, the orange markings of the sage flaring into existence. The world snapped into focus. A vibrant tapestry of life and energy, with the Grimm heart as a festering black wound at its center. He held out his hand, chakra gathering with a high-pitched shriek. Rasengan. He charged. Silas saw him coming. With a curse, he shoved Blake aside, a lightning-infused knife slashing across her arm, and turned to intercept Naruto. But Blake, even injured, wasn't done. She fired the gun in her hilt, the bullet ricocheting off the cobblestones and striking Silas in the back of the knee, not enough to seriously injure him, but enough to make him stumble. Naruto was on him. He didn't even look at Silas. His focus was solely on the heart. He vaulted over the staggering ex-huntsman and plunged the swirling sphere of pure, natural energy deep into the pulsating black mass. There was no explosion, no sound. There was only light. A wave of pure, golden energy erupted from the point of impact. It was not destructive. It was cleansing. The despair, the fear, the psychic poison that had saturated the village, it was all incinerated in that single, silent flash of positive power. The black, thorny heart dissolved into dust, its roots turning to ash. Across the village, the effect was instantaneous. The stalkers, their connection to the heart severed, shrieked in agony as their shadowy forms destabilized and dissolved into nothingness, like smoke in the wind. In the sudden, profound silence, Silas stared at the empty space where his creation had been, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked at Naruto, at the sage markings on his face, a flicker of something like religious terror in his eyes. The anomaly, he whispered, a name he could only have heard from his queen. He was a professional. He knew when a fight was lost. With one last, hateful glare, he threw down a smoke pell. Let and vanished into the collapsing shadows of the village. The trap had failed. The aftermath was quiet, the only sound the soft crunch of snow under their boots as they regrouped. Yang was supporting Weiss, whose aura was dangerously low. RWBY was breathing heavily, her face pale. Naruto rushed to Blake's side. She was clutching her arm, a deep, ugly gash bleeding sluggishly, the edges of the wound sizzling with residual lightning dust. I'm fine, she insisted, though her face was tight with pain. Hold still, Naruto said, his voice gentle but firm. He placed his hand over the wound. A soft, green chakra emanated from his palm, and the bleeding slowed, the sizzling stopped, and the raw edges of the cut began to knit themselves together. It was a crude, battlefield application of medical ninjutsu. but it was more effective than any first aid kit. Blake watched, her amber eyes wide with wonder, as the pain receded and the wound began to close. She looked up at his face, at the focused, gentle expression in his eyes. In that moment, he wasn't a weapon or a powerhouse. He was a protector, a healer. They found no trace of the villagers. The Grimm were gone, the oppressive despair lifted, but Sheehan remained a ghost town. A silent monument to Salem's cruelty. Back in the tower, their debrief with Ozpin was short and grim. He listened to their report, his expression growing darker with every word. Silas, I remember him, Ozpin murmured, his eyes distant. A promising student. He saw too much darkness on a mission in the outer territories. He lost faith. He looked at them, his gaze heavy. You have now seen the true face of our enemy. It is not just the face of a monster. It is the face of our fellow man, twisted by despair into serving the darkness. This war will not be won with strength alone. Later that night, the dorm room was silent. The floor nest felt less like a comfort and more like a huddle for survival. Naruto was tending to Blake's wound again, applying a proper dressing now that his chakra had stabilized the injury. The others watched in silence. You were reckless, he said softly, his fingers working with a practiced gentleness. I trusted you, Blake replied, her voice just as quiet. She met his gaze, her amber eyes clear and unwavering. I knew you'd finish the job. It was a simple exchange, but it was a vow. A declaration of absolute, unconditional faith. Forged in the heat of battle. A bond deeper than that of teammates, deeper than that of friends. Naruto finished the dressing and looked out the window. The snow was falling thicker now, blanketing the world in white. But he knew it wasn't a blanket of peace. It was just a shroud, hiding the darkness that lay beneath. Silas was a pawn, a single soldier in a vast army. And the queen was still on her throne, watching, waiting, and planning her next move. The game had begun in earnest. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. A Kingdom of Steel and Glass. The vital festival was coming. It was a phrase whispered in the hallways. A vibrant current of excitement that buzzed through the student body of Beacon. Teams from Haven, Shade, and Atlas were beginning to arrive, filling the campus with W faces and the boisterous energy of friendly rivalry. To the average student, it was a time of celebration, a showcase of the next generation of huntsmen. To Team RNJB/RWBY, a silent, unspoken acronym. They had adopted in the privacy of their room, it was a countdown timer on a bomb. Every crowd, every celebration, was a potential target. Every new face was a possible mask for the enemy. This quiet paranoia had sharpened them. Their training sessions were no longer academic exercises, they were brutal, silent affairs conducted in the dead of night. Naruto pushed them to their limits and then beyond, forcing them to fight exhausted. Disoriented, and outnumbered, they had stopped pulling their punches. The bruises they gave each other were a testament to a grim, shared understanding. The pain Hay inflicted in training was a shield against the death that awaited them in the real world. Their isolation was a necessary consequence. They would sit at their usual table in the bustling cafeteria, and the laughter and gossip from the surrounding tables would feel like it was coming from another world. They were an island in a sea of blissful ignorance, their smiles tight, their eyes constantly scanning the room. John and the rest of Team JNPR would try to include them in discussions about the tournament, but their answers were always vague, their attention distant. How could they talk out tournament brackets when they were mentally mapping out the kill zones in the room? The first tremor of the coming earthquake arrived not as a Grimm, but as a man. General James Ironwood, headmaster of Atlas Academy and the leader of its military, strode into Ozpin's office with the force of a walking blizzard. He was a mountain of a man, his immaculate white uniform stretched taut over a broad, powerful frame. Half of his body a marvel of Atlesian cybernetics. He radiated an aura of absolute, uncompromising authority. With him, he brought the Atlesian Air Fleet, a sky-darkening procession of warships that now hung over Vale like a steel guillotine. Naruto and his team stood at attention by the window, ostensibly as Ozpin's honor guard, but in reality, they were there to listen. To learn. Ozpin, Ironwood began, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that resonated with power. Your security measures for the festival are quaint, but inadequate. I've brought the Second Fleet to assist with security. Your assistance, is a show of force, James, Ozpin replied, his calm a stark contrast to Ironwood's iron rigidity. He took a serene sip of his coffee. It puts people on edge. Fear is the match that lights Salem's fire. As you well know, and inaction is the kindling, Ironwood countered, his metallic hand clenching into a fist. The disappearances in the southeast, the Spike Eye, and Grim activity, these are not isolated incidents. They are the prelude to an attack. We need to present a united, unassailable front. Show her that we are not afraid. By pointing a fleet of warships at our own citizens. Ozpin's voice was soft, but it carried a sharp, cutting edge. Strength is not the only weapon in our arsenal, James. Sometimes, the quietest move on the board is the one that checkmates the queen. The ideological chasm between the two men was vast and impassable. Ironwood, a man who believed in order through absolute control, in solving problems with overwhelming firepower. Ozpin, the shadowy grandmaster, who fought his war with secrets, misdirection, and carefully chosen agents. Naruto watched them, a sense of weary familiarity washing over him. He had seen this debate play out in Konoha's council rooms 100 times. The old guard versus the new. The fist versus the open hand. The debate was cut short by a priority alert on Ozpin's scroll. His face, already grim, tightened into a mask of cold fury as he read the incoming report. It started, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at Ironwood, a silent, bitter acknowledgement passing between them. The Schnee Dust Company transport on the Northern Rail line has been hit. Cargo stolen, an entire platoon of your Atlesian Knight 200s destroyed. The attackers used advanced infiltration tech and military-grade explosives. He paused, letting the final, damning piece of information settle in the air. Eyewitnesses report the assailants were wearing grim masks. It was the White Fang. The air in the room went cold. All eyes instinctively turned to Blake. She flinched as if struck, her face draining of all color. No, she whispered, her voice shaking. It can't be. Weiss's reaction was the polar opposite. A storm of ice and fury gathered in her eyes. The White Fang, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. They're animals. My father sends our technology, our resources, to protect this kingdom for the festival. And this is how they repay him. By attacking us. By destroying our property. Weiss, it's not. Blake started, but Weiss cut her off. Don't you dare defend them, Blake. Don't you dare. That's enough. Both of you. Ironwood's voice boomed, cutting through the argument like a cannon blast. He turned to Ozpin, his face set like granite. This is no longer a theoretical threat, Ozpin. It is an act of war against my kingdom on Vale's soil. My men will handle this. Your men will turn the city into a war zone and play right into her hands, Ozpin shot back. He looked at his team. At the fracturing rift between Weiss and Blake. He made a decision. General, give me 12 hours. My team will investigate. They are fast, discreet, and they have a unique perspective on our enemy. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards Naruto. Ironwood looked at the 5 students, his gaze lingering on Naruto with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. He had been briefed on the anomaly. But data files were one thing, a blonde teenager in an orange jacket was another. 12 hours, Ozpin, he conceded with a growl. Then my paladins are rolling down these streets. And I will tear this city apart to find the culprits. Don't make me regret this. The moment they were back in the dorm, the dam broke. How can you be so sure it wasn't them? Weiss demanded, rounding on Blake. They're terrorists. This is exactly what they do. Because I know them. Blake retorted, her amber eyes flashing with a desperate, cornered fire. The White Fang I left was disorganized, fractured. They used protests and petty theft, not stolen Atlas tech and military tactics. They don't have the training or the resources. Someone is setting them up. Or maybe they just got better at being monsters. Enough. Naruto's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room with an absolute authority that stopped them both cold. He stepped between them, his blue eyes holding a deep, empathetic sadness. He looked at Weiss. Your family was attacked, he said, his voice softening. You're home. You have every right to be angry. I get it. He paused, and his gaze became distant, ancient. My home was destroyed. I watched it burn. I know what that anger feels like. It's a fire. It can keep you warm, or it can burn down everything you're trying to protect. He then turned to Blake. And you, he said, are afraid. You're afraid that the people you once called brothers have become the very thing you fought against. And you're afraid that the people you now call sisters will hate you for it. He had laid their deepest fears bare with a gentle, devastating precision. The anger drained from Weiss's face, replaced by a flicker of shame. Blake looked away, unable to meet his gaze. We are not going to fall apart. Naruto continued, his voice hardening again. That is exactly what Salem wants. She wants us fighting each other, blinded by anger and fear. We are a team, and we will trust each other. He looked pointedly at Weiss. That means we trust Blake when she says something is wrong. He then looked at Blake. And we trust that we're strong enough to handle the truth, whatever it is. A heavy silence filled the room. It was Weiss who broke it. She let out a long, shaky breath, the frost in her demeanor melting away, leaving her looking vulnerable, lost. My father, she began. Her voice barely a whisper. He's not a good man. The way he runs the company, the things he's done to the Faunus, I know it. I hate it, but it's still my family. My legacy. When it's attacked, you feel like you have to defend it, Naruto finished for her. He walked over to her, his presence a quiet, comforting weight. I had a legacy, too. My father was a hero who saved our village. A legend. I spent my whole life trying to live up to his name, to escape his shadow. A legacy is a heavy thing to carry. He offered her a small, sad smile. You are not your father, Weiss. You are the person you choose to be. Just like Blake is not the White Fang anymore. Weiss looked at him, then over at Blake, and for the first time, the anger in her eyes was replaced by a dawning, pained understanding. She gave a single, curt nod. The rift was not healed, but it had been bridged. The investigation was a race against time. While the others analyzed public footage and cross-referenced shipping manifests, Naruto and Blake took to the streets. He had her describe the White Fang's old safehouses, their supply routes, the places they would go to ground. They moved through the grimy, industrial underbelly of Vale, a world away from Beacon's pristine halls. Naruto's sage mode was their guide. He filtered out the noise of the city, searching for a specific signature, the faint, cold taint of grim energy he had felt on Silas and the Geist. For hours, they found nothing but dead ends. As the sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows, Blake slumped against a brick wall in a deserted alley. Her energy flagging. It's hopeless, she murmured. We're going to run out of time. Ironwood will roll in, and it'll be a massacre. We're not done yet, Naruto said, his eyes closed in concentration. There's so much noise, so much negativity in this part of the city. It's hard to find the signal. He focused, pushing his senses further, deeper. And then, he found it. A thin, cold thread of energy, almost completely masked by the industrial smog and the ambient misery of the district. It was coming from a massive, derelict Schnee Dust Company warehouse by the docks. Got it, he said, his eyes snapping open. Let's go. They regrouped with Ruby and Yang, relaying the location. Weiss, using her knowledge of the SDC's architectural plans, guided them through A4. Gotten maintenance tunnel that brought them up inside the cavernous, dark warehouse. The place was a maze of rusted catwalks and towering stacks of empty dust containers. And it was crawling with them. At least 24 men, all wearing the telltale grim masks of the White Fang, patrolled the floor. But they moved with the eerie, synchronized precision of soldiers, not a disorganized mob. Those aren't Faunus, Blake whispered from their hiding spot on a high catwalk, her cat's eyes seeing clearly in the dark. Their builds, the way they move, they're human. Mercenaries. Worse, Naruto could feel it. Each one of them had the same faint, parasitic taint he had felt on Cardin, but it was stronger, more ingrained. They were being controlled. In the center of the warehouse floor, Silas stood over a large, open crate filled with stolen Atlesian knights, his hands moving over one of the robots. Black, tendril-like veins of grim energy were spreading from his fingertips, seeping into the machine's wiring, corrupting it. He's not just framing the White Fang, Weiss breathed in horror. He's creating a private army of grim fused machines and puppet soldiers. And he's about to ship them out, Yang added. pointing to a large cargo vessel moored at the dock outside the warehouse's massive bay doors. Their mission was clear: stop Silas, secure the evidence, and do it before Ironwood's 12 hours were up. Young, you and Weiss take the soldiers on the left, Ruby commanded in a hushed, tactical whisper. Blake, you and I have the right. Naruto, you get Silas. They moved as one, dropping from the catwalks into the heart of the enemy. The fight exploded with a silent, brutal efficiency. Yang and Weiss were a storm of fire and ice, their attacks perfectly synchronized. Blake and RWBY were a whirlwind of red and black, a seamless dance of scythe and blade. The brainwashed soldiers were skilled, but they were puppets. They lacked creativity, improvisation. Team RWBY, honed by Naruto's relentless training, dismantled them. Naruto moved straight for the center, a streak of orange through the chaos. Silas looked up, a cruel smirk on his face. The anomaly, he sneered. Come to ruin all my fun. The grim-fused Atlesian knight beside him whirred to life, its optical sensors glowing a malevolent red. It lumbered forward, its minigun spinning. Naruto didn't slow down. He formed a Rasengan in one hand as he ran. But as the robot opened fire, he did something unexpected. With his free hand, he slammed his palm onto the ground. A complex array of seals, a summoning jutsu, spread out across the floor. Summoning jutsu, he roared. In a huge puff of smoke, a creature of impossible size materialized between Naruto and the robot. It was a giant, crimson toad, as large as a house. Wearing a blue happy vest and carrying a massive Tonto blade on its back. Gamabunta, Naruto yelled from atop its head. We need to smash some toys. The giant toad boss took one look at the grim-fused robot and let out a gruff, booming laugh. Well, Naruto. You've found some interesting playmates in this strange new world. The girls of Team RWBY faltered for a second, staring in absolute, jaw-dropping disbelief at the skyscraper-sized talking toad that had just appeared in the middle of the warehouse. Focus, Naruto yelled, and the battle resumed, now with a decidedly more chaotic and destructive element. Silas, seeing his trump card being held at bay by a giant amphibian, abandoned the fight and made a break for the cargo ship. But Blake was there to intercept him, her eyes burning with a cold fury. Their duel was a frantic, desperate clash of blades on the loading dock. Naruto knew he had a choice. He could go after Silas, the mastermind, or he could deal with the soldiers. His sage senses felt their minds, their wills, trapped and screaming inside the parasitic cages Silas had built. They weren't evil, they were victims. The same choice he'd faced with Cardin, multiplied by 24. He made his decision. While Gamabunta wrestled with the corrupted paladin, Naruto began to move through the remaining soldiers. He didn't strike to kill or maim. He flowed through them, a phantom of mercy. A precise chop to the neck here, a nerve strike to a pressure point there. He was disabling them, knocking them unconscious without causing lasting harm, severing the parasite's connection through sheer trauma to the nervous system. He was saving them. On the dock, Blake fought with a ferocity she hadn't known she possessed. She fought for her name, for her people, for her friends. But Silas was better. He disarmed her, kicking her to the ground, one of his lightning knives held to her throat. It's over, little runaway, he hissed. Suddenly, a series of white glyphs snapped into existence around him, trapping him in a cage of gravitational force. He looked up to see Weiss standing on a nearby container. Murdenaster pointed at him, her eyes like chips of ice. She had left her own fight to save her partner. Get away from her, Weiss commanded, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. The distraction was all Blake needed. She swept his legs out from under him, and as he fell, Naruto was there. He appeared in a flash of movement, his palm slamming onto Silas's forehead. He didn't use sage art to expel a parasite. He used a targeted pulse of chakra to disrupt Silas's mind, to access his surface thoughts. He saw images, plans, a map of Vale with a new target circled in red, the CCT tower, the heart of global communications. It was a plan for a future attack, meant to sow chaos during the vital festival itself. Then, Silas's body dissolved into a swarm of black crows that scattered into the night, a trick of dust and semblance. He was gone. The fight was over. Gamabunta vanished in a puff of smoke, the warehouse was secured, the soldiers were unconscious but alive, and the evidence was irrefutable. But they were out of time. As they stood on the docks, the first wave of Atlesian airships descended, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. Ironwood's paladins began to march down the streets, their heavy footfalls the drumbeat of an occupying army. They had won the battle, but Ozpin had lost the political fight. Ironwood's fist had closed around Vale. They looked up at the steel-gray ships, a fleet that was supposed to be a symbol of unity and strength. Now, it felt like the bars of a cage, one that Salem had tricked them into building themselves. The shadow of the mountain had fallen, and they were all trapped beneath it. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Weight of a Crown. The city of Vale had become a gilded cage. On the surface, the vital festival preparations continued with a feverish, almost manic energy. Brightly colored banners fluttered from every lamppost, the streets were clean, and the ever-present holographic advertisements sang of unity and celebration. But it was a facade. A beautiful, paper-thin mask stretched over a face of cold, hard steel. General Ironwood's fleet hung in the sky, a permanent, steel-gray storm cloud that refused to break. His soldiers, both human and robotic, patrolled the streets with an unnerving, silent efficiency. Their presence was meant to be reassuring, a symbol of Atlesian strength and order. Instead, it was a constant, suffocating pressure. Checkpoints were set up at major intersections. Scrolls were subject to random security scans. The joyful buzz of the festival had been replaced by the quiet, orderly hum of a city under occupation. For Team RNJB RWBY, BICO, N itself had become a different kind of prison. They were heroes in the secret war, but ghosts in the public one. They walked the halls under a shroud of suspicion from the visiting Atlesian students, and a cloud of wary curiosity from their own peers. The whispers followed them everywhere. They were Ozpin's chosen, the team that was involved in the dockside incident. Their victory in the warehouse had been a strategic masterpiece. But the political fallout was a slow-acting poison. The summons came, as it always did, to the Clockwork Tower. This time, Ironwood was there, standing beside Ozpin's desk not as a guest, but as an equal, a second king on a single throne. The air was thick with the silent clash of their ideologies. Your team performed admirably, Ironwood began, his voice a low rumble that did nothing to hide his disapproval. You secured the evidence, neutralized the immediate threat, and cleared the White Fang of this specific incident. He stressed the word, specific, as if it were a dirty thing. But Silas escaped, and we are no closer to discovering his true objective. That's not entirely true, Naruto said, stepping forward. He met the general's cold, cybernetic gaze without flinching. Before he disappeared, I was able to interface with his consciousness. I saw fragments of his plans. His next target is the CCT, the Cross-Continental Transmit System TOE. R was the communications heart of the Four Kingdoms, a symbol of global unity and the crown jewel of Vale. An attack on it would be catastrophic. As I predicted, Ironwood stated, a grim satisfaction in his voice. An attack on the global network during the festival would sow maximum chaos. My proposal is simple. I will move a full battalion to the CCT. We will lock it down, fortify it, and turn it into a fortress. And in doing so, you will announce to Salem that we know her plan, Ozpin countered, his voice deceptively mild. You will create a panic, you will show our hand, and you will RCE her to change her strategy to something we can't predict. We must be subtle. We reinforce security quietly, use our own agents to watch from the shadows. Shadows are where our enemies thrive, Ozpin. Ironwood slammed his metallic fist on the desk, the impact echoing like a gunshot. Your subtlety is what allowed this rot to fester in the first place. We need to meet this threat with overwhelming, undeniable force. Weiss stood rigid throughout the exchange, a silent statue of conflicted loyalties. Her kingdom's leader was advocating for a strategy she knew, instinctively, was wrong. Her headmaster was arguing for a path of subtlety that had, so far, only led them from one crisis to another. She was a Schnee of Atlas, but she was a huntress of Beacon. The two halves of her identity were at war. The war arrived at her doorstep that afternoon, in the form of a woman who was both her family and her superior officer. Winter Schnee was a vision of sharp, crystalline perfection. Her white military uniform was immaculate. Her movements precise, and her eyes held the same icy blue hue as Weiss's, but where Weiss's held a fiery passion, Winter's held the cold, hard certainty of a glacier. She found them in the courtyard, and her arrival silenced all conversation around them. She surveyed the team, her gaze dismissing RWBY's youth, Yang's bravado, and Blake's quiet intensity. Her eyes lingered for a moment on Naruto, a flicker of analytical curiosity in their depths, before she finally settled on her sister. "Weiss," she said, her voice as crisp and cold as the winter air. A word. The two sisters stood apart from the group, a pocket of Arctic frost in the bustling courtyard. Naruto couldn't hear their words, but he could read the story in their posture. Winter was a steel wall of condescension, her every gesture a critique. Weiss was a defensive line of defiance, her shoulders squared, her chin high. "I have reviewed your team's performance reports," Winter's voice carried, sharp and clear. "Your tactics are reckless, your teammates undisciplined. And this boy," she glanced at Naruto, "this anomaly Ozpin has taken in. He is an unregistered power source, a loose cannon. This is not the Atlesian way. This is not our way. They are my team," Weiss replied, her voice tight. "And they are the best huntsmen I have ever known." "They are children playing games in the dark," Winter countered. "Games that will get you killed." General Ironwood agrees. "Your place is not here, chasing shadows with Ozpin's pets. It is with me, with Atlas. I have been authorized to offer you an immediate commission into the specialist program. It's time to come home, Weiss. It's time to remember who you are." It was a lifeline, a path back to the structured, logical world she had been raised in. A way out of the secret war, the impossible choices, the crushing weight of a world on her shoulders. For a terrifying second, she considered it. She looked over at her team. At RWBY's worried frown, at Yang's protective glare, at Blake's quiet, unwavering support, and at Naruto, who was watching her, not with pressure or expectation, but with a simple, profound trust. "My home is here," Weiss said, her voice no longer tight, but ringing with a newfound clarity. "And these are my people. I'm sorry, sister, but I'm not going anywhere." Winter's expression was one of profound disappointment. "So be it," she said, turning away. "Do not expect my help when their recklessness proves to be your undoing." The confrontation left a bitter taste in the air. Later that day, Ozpin provided them with a way to wash it out. He gave them a new mission, a quiet thread that Ironwood's sledgehammer approach would have missed entirely. Several of the older, decommissioned SDC dust mines beneath the city have been reporting strange, fluctuating energy readings, he explained, showing them a map of the labyrinthine tunnels that crisscrossed the bedrock of Vale. "It could be residual dust reactions. Or it could be something else. Ironwood's forces are focused on the surface. I need you to be my eyes in the deep." It was a chance to act, to do something tangible while the generals postured above. Weiss, using her high-level Schnee family credentials, granted them access to a rickety, automated elevator in a forgotten mining substation. The descent was a long, rattling journey into darkness and silence. The air grew cold, heavy with the smell of damp earth and metallic dust. Naruto closed his eyes, his sage senses casting a net into the oppressive dark. "There's life down here," he said, his voice a low whisper that seemed to be absorbed by the stone walls. "A lot of it, but it's weak, frightened." They emerged into a vast, cavernous space. The energy readings were stronger here, leading them down a long abandoned tunnel. They moved in tactical formation, their weapons drawn, the beams of their flashlights cutting sharp, nervous paths through the gloom. At the end of the tunnel, they found its source. A makeshift barricade of rusted mine carts and scrap metal blocked the way. And from behind it, dozens of pairs of eyes glinted in the darkness. They were Faunus, men, women, and children, their faces gaunt, their clothes little more than rags. They were refugees, and they were terrified. An elderly Faunus with the tired, wary eyes of a cornered wolf and the horns of a ram stepped forward. A rusty mining pick held in his trembling hands. "Go away, humans," he rasped, his voice rough with disuse. "We have nothing for you to take." Blake stepped forward, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "We're not here to hurt you," she said softly. The elder's eyes narrowed as he saw her. He saw the ghost of a black bow, the echo of a symbol she no longer wore. You, he spat, his voice laced with venom. A traitor. You wear the face of the Fang, but you walk with humans. You are worse than they are. The accusation struck Blake like a physical blow. Before the situation could escalate, Weiss stepped up beside her, her white dress a stark, almost blinding contrast to the oppressive gloom. I am Weiss Schnee, she announced, her voice ringing with an authority she didn't feel. These are SDC mines. Legally, you are trespassing. The Faunus recoiled, a wave of fear and hatred washing over them at the sound of her name. The Schnee name was a curse in the ear of any Faunus who had ever toiled for a pittance in their family's dust mines. But, Weiss continued, her voice losing its aristocratic edge, becoming something softer, more hesitant, we are not here as representatives of the SDC. We are here as huntsmen. And we are here to help. Her words were met with a wall of hostile silence. The standoff was broken by a sudden, jarring alarm. A shrill, electronic screech echoed down the tunnels. A red light began to flash, painting the cavern in bloody, rhythmic pulses. Silent proximity alarm, Weiss whispered in horror. An old Atlesian security system I didn't know was still active. They know we're here. From the tunnel they had just come down, they heard it. The heavy, synchronized tramp of metal feet. A patrol of Atlesian knights, their optical sensors glowing a menacing red. Rounded the corner, their rifles raised. Unidentified lifeforms detected, a synthesized voice droned. This sector is under quarantine. Surrender for detainment. The Faunus panicked, a collective cry of terror echoing in the cavern. They knew what detainment meant. A one-way trip to a labor camp in Mantle, or worse. The team was trapped. They stood between a platoon of unflinching killing machines and 200 innocent, terrified civilians. To fight meant open rebellion against Atlas. To stand down meant condemning these people to a fate worse than death. RWBY tried to reason with them. Her voice desperate. We are Beacon students. Stand down. Negative. All unauthorized personnel will be detained. Lethal force is authorized, the lead robot replied. Its rifle charging with a high-pitched whine. There were no good options. As the robots raised their weapons, Naruto moved. He wasn't a blur of speed. He simply stepped forward, planting his feet on the stone floor. He took a deep breath, and slammed both palms onto the ground. Sage art. Tectonic ripple. It wasn't a destructive jutsu. It was a masterpiece of control. The ground didn't shatter, it flowed. A controlled shockwave, a pulse of pure, natural chakra, traveled through the rock. Behind the robots, the ceiling of the tunnel groaned and then collapsed, a curtain of stone and earth sealing the entrance. A second, smaller tremor caused the tunnel in front of them to buckle, trapping the platoon of knights in a newly formed stone box. The immediate threat was gone, but they were now trapped with it. Before anyone could react, Naruto's form flickered and changed. He was suddenly taller, older, wearing the stained, practical uniform of an SDC mining foreman. He tapped the side of his head, activating his comm link, which he'd cleverly synced to the Atlas frequency. Foreman Uzumaki to Atlas Command, do you read me? He said, his voice a pitch-perfect imitation of a bored, world-weary worker. We've had a minor seismic event down here in Sector GAMMA7. Tunnels collapsed. Looks unstable. I'm quarantining the whole sector until a structural engineering team can assess. Keep your tin soldiers out of here until I give the all clear, you copy? There was a moment of static, then a clipped, professional voice replied. Acknowledged, Foreman. Sector GAMMA7 is under quarantine. Report back in 24 hours. Naruto let out a sigh, his form flickering back to his own. He had just bluffed the entire Atlesian military with a lie, a transformation, and a bit of theatrical geology. A stunned silence filled the cavern. The Faunus refugees stared at him, their expressions a mixture of terror and awe. The ram-horned elder looked from the collapsed tunnel, to Weiss and Blake who were standing defensively in front of his people, and then to the blonde boy who had just commanded the very earth to do his bidding, not to destroy, but to protect. You saved us, the elder stammered. The pick falling from his numb fingers. A Schnee, and a Fang, you saved us. Weiss looked at the desperate, hopeful faces, and the weight of her family's crown, a crown of greed and prejudice. Suddenly felt a little lighter. She had made her choice. She wasn't her father's daughter anymore. She was a huntress. Blake looked at the people her former comrades had abandoned, and shame of her past was replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. This was her atonement, not running, but standing. Protecting. They had won. They had saved these people. But as the reality of their situation settled in, a new, heavier weight took its place. They were now the secret guardians of 200 refugees, hidden in a collapsed mine shaft beneath a city occupied by an army that would see them all as criminals. They were caught between Salem's shadows and Ironwood's steel, and the path forward had just become infinitely more dangerous. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Ghost in the Machine. The collapsed mining tunnel had become a paradox, a sanctuary and a prison. For the Faunus refugees, it was the first safe place they had known in months. For Team RWBY, it was a ticking time bomb. A secret that grew heavier with every passing hour. Their lives fractured into a frantic, dangerous balancing act. By day, they were Beacon students, smiling through the escalating pageantry of the vital festival. Their faces a mask of normalcy. By night, they were smugglers and quartermasters, using Naruto's transformation jutsu and Blake's knowledge of the city's underbelly to sneak food, water purifiers, and medical supplies down to their hidden charges. The weight of the secret was a crucible, forging their bonds into something unbreakable. Weiss, using her own lean and a series of cleverly falsified SDC requisitions, became their silent benefactor, funneling a fortune into the survival of the people her family had oppressed. It was a quiet, desperate act of rebellion against her own name. Yang, the team's unshakable pillar of strength, was their muscle and their morale officer, her infectious optimism a vital medicine for the refugees' weary souls. RWBY, the brilliant engineer, worked with the old foreman to jury-rig the mine's failing life support systems, her technical genius a beacon of hope in the suffocating dark. And Blake had found her purpose. She was no longer a runaway, but a leader. She organized the refugees, mediated disputes, and listened to their stories of loss and persecution. She saw in their faces the ghosts of the white fangs she had once believed in, and she was slowly, painfully, finding a way to forgive herself. Naruto was the linchpin that held it all together. His shadow clones, a technique he used sparingly to conserve his dwindling chakra, ran multiple supply routes at once. His sage senses were a constant, vigilant perimeter, a living early warning system against both Grim and Atlesian patrols. But the strain was beginning to show. The sage mode took more and more effort to maintain, the natural energy of this world thin and reluctant. Kurama was a silent, simmering furnace inside him, his own vast reserves being taxed by the constant, low-level drain of his host's activities. He was the strongest of them all, but he was also the most finite. The first crack in their fragile sanctuary came not from the outside, but from within. During a routine scan of the global network for any trace of Silas, Blake's scroll began to behave erratically. Lines of corrupted code flashed across the screen, too fast to read. A single, stylized emblem, a black queen chess piece, flickered into existence for a fraction of a second before her entire system crashed. What was that? RWBY asked, peering over her shoulder. I don't know, Blake said, a chill running down her spine. It was like something was in the network. Something ancient and intelligent. Weiss brought her own scroll over, her fingers flying across the screen as she ran a diagnostic. The CCT network is the most secure system in the world. It's a closed loop, monitored by Atlas's best AI. Nothing gets in or out without authorization. But even as she said it, she saw the anomalies. Tiny, ghost-like packets of data, moving through the system like sharks in deep water, their digital signatures masked by layers of impossibly complex encryption. She's already inside, Naruto said, his voice grim. He didn't need a scroll to see the truth. His senses, which he was now pushing to their absolute limit, could feel it. A cold, calculating intelligence wove into the very fabric of the global communications network. It was the same energy he had felt from Salem herself, a whisper of her will echoing through the world's machines. She's not going to attack the CCT. She's going to use it. The realization was a hammer blow. Ironwood's fortress, his army of soldiers and ships, they were all focused on the wrong threat. They were guarding the castle wall. LLS while the enemy was already in the throne room, a ghost in the machine. Their focus shifted. The vital festival tournament had begun, a dazzling spectacle of combat prowess that held the entire world captivated. Team RWBY fought their preliminary matches with a detached, almost surgical precision, ending each fight as quickly as possible. There was no joy in their victories, only a grim sense of duty. Every moment they spent in the arena was a moment they weren't hunting the real enemy. The breakthrough came during a match between Yang and a cocky, arrogant student from Haven. As Yang delivered the final, knockout blow, the massive holographic scoreboard above the arena flickered. For a single, almost imperceptible frame, the roaring crowd vanished, replaced by a black screen and the same stark image of a black queen chess piece. Then it was gone. No one else seemed to notice. But in the stands, Naruto, Blake, and Weiss saw it. And they knew. The virus is embedded in the broadcast signal itself, Weiss whispered. Her mind racing. It's piggybacking on the live feed. It's using the tournament as a delivery system, spreading to every scroll, every terminal, every screen in the Four Kingdoms. But what does it do? RWBY asked, joining them after the victory ceremony, her metal feeling like a lead weight in her hand. It's dormant, Blake answered, her eyes wide with a terrifying understanding. It's a sleeper agent, a logic bomb, waiting for a trigger. The trigger, they realized, would be the final round of the tournament. The entire world would be watching. It was the perfect stage for a global catastrophe. They had to find the source, the central node that was controlling the virus, and they had to do it without alerting Ironwood, who would undoubtedly respond with an electronic sledgehammer that could crash the entire global system. Their hunt led them to Penny Polendina. She was a quirky, endearing, and impossibly strong girl from Atlas, a friend they had made in the weeks leading up to the festival. But she was also a mystery. Naruto's senses told him she wasn't human. She had no aura, no life force. She was a marvel of engineering, a soul in a synthetic shell. And she was, they discovered, directly and wirelessly linked to the CCT network at all times, a personal project of General Ironwood. She was the perfect, unknowing host. They found her in a quiet garden, watching the sunset. She greeted them with her usual, disarming cheerfulness, but Naruto could see the conflict behind her bright, green eyes. Penny, he began, his voice gentle, we need your help. We think there's something hidden in the CCT network. A virus. We need to find its origin point. Penny's smile faltered. I am not permitted to grant unauthorized access to the network's core systems. My father, General Ironwood, he would be very cross. We know this is a lot to ask, Weiss said, stepping forward. But we believe the entire network is compromised. This isn't about breaking rules. It's about preventing a disaster. Penny looked at them, at the desperate sincerity in their faces. She was a machine, built for obedience. But she was also a girl who craved friendship, who wanted to be a hero. Her programming and her heart were at war. In the end, her heart won. Very well, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But we must be exceedingly careful. She led them not to the CCT, but to a hidden, underground Atlas research lab beneath Beacon, a place Ironwood had set up without Ozpin's knowledge. It was a sterile, white room, dominated by a massive holographic interface. With a few, hesitant commands, Penny opened a back door into the CCT's core programming. The screen lit up with a three-dimensional representation of the global network, a shimmering, celestial sphere of light and data. And woven through it, like a cancer, were pulsing, black threads of corrupted code. The virus. It was beautiful and terrifying. There's so much of it, RWBY breathed. How do we find the source? We don't, Naruto said, stepping up to the console. He placed a hand on the holographic interface. We make it find us. He closed his eyes, ignoring the protests of Weiss and the panicked warnings of Penny. He wasn't looking at the code. He was reaching out with his senses, searching for the cold, malevolent consciousness he knew was behind it. He let a tiny, controlled pulse of his own sage chakra flow into the system. It was a single drop of life, of natural energy, in an ocean of sterile data and cold, hard logic. The effect was instantaneous. The entire network convulsed. The black threads of the virus stopped their slow, insidious spread and recoiled, as if burned. Then, they converged, rushing from all corners of the globe towards a single point. Towards him. On the screen, a new figure materialized. It was a woman, her form composed of glitching, corrupted data. She was unnaturally tall and thin, with skin as white as static and hair as black as a dead screen. Her eyes were pools of crimson code, and when she spoke, her voice was a discordant symphony of synthesized tones and human screams. The anomaly, the digital wraith hissed. The variable I could not account for. You have meddled in my affairs for the last time. Salem, Naruto growled, his eyes still closed, his mind locked in a battle of wills with the digital queen. I am everywhere, little boy. Salem's avatar mocked. I am in the steel of Atlas, the whispers in the dark, and the very air that you breathe. This world is my machine, and you are but a single, broken cog. The lab's systems went haywire. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into the emergency red of the backup power. On the main screen, the virus began to fight back, launching a full-scale assault on Penny's core programming. She cried out in pain, clutching her head as lines of red code streamed across her synthetic irises. She's trying to take control of Penny. RWBY shouted, to turn her into a weapon. Weiss, Blake, hold her off. Naruto commanded, his face beaded with sweat. Young, RWBY, with me. We need to sever her connection at the source. He pointed to a clue. Stir of physical servers in the corner of the room, the physical anchor point for the CCT's primary broadcast relay. It was the eye of the hurricane. The battle became a desperate, two-front war. Weiss and Blake fought to save Penny. Not with weapons, but with code. Weiss, with her logical, precise mind, erected digital firewalls, her fingers a blur on the console. Blake, with her intuitive, guerrilla-style thinking, created decoy programs and data traps, leading the virus on a wild goose chase through Penny's subsystems. Meanwhile, Yang and RWBY provided cover for Naruto, their weapons firing into the darkness. From the shadows of the lab, Silas emerged, a cruel smile on his face, flanked by a new, horrifying creation, Atlesian Knights, their armor plating fused with writhing, grim like bone, their rifles firing bolts of pure negative energy. Naruto ignored them all. He stood before the server bank, his hands glowing with a soft, green chakra. He wasn't trying to destroy the machines. He was trying to heal them. He was performing a digital exorcism, pushing his life-giving energy into the cold, hard logic of the servers, forcing Salem's parasitic code out, one line at a time. It was a battle of pure will. Life against anti-life, in a realm of pure information. The strain was immense. He could feel Salem's mind, a vast, cold, and ancient intellect, pushing back against him, trying to crush him. He felt Kurama roar in his mind, lending him his own immense reserves, a tide of raw, feral power to bolster his own. On the other side of the room, Penny screamed. The virus had broken through their defenses. Her eyes glowed a solid, terrifying red. Thin, almost invisible wires shot from her back, their tips sharpened like blades. She was no longer Penny. She was Salem's puppet. She lunged at Weiss. But Blake was there, tackling her, the two of them crashing to the floor. The wires shot out, embedding themselves in Blake's shoulder, and she cried out in pain. Seeing Blake injured, something inside Yang snapped. With a roar of pure, unadulterated rage, her hair exploded into a golden flame, her eyes burning red. She became a comet of fury, ignoring the grim knights, N.D. slammed into the brainwashed Penny with the force of a freight train. The impact sent Penny flying, crashing into the server bank right beside Naruto. The physical shock, combined with the golden wave of pure, life-fueled sage energy Naruto was pouring into the system, created a feedback loop. There was a deafening shriek of tearing metal and corrupted data. The lights in the lab exploded in a shower of sparks. The avatar of Salem on the screen screamed in agony as it was violently ejected from the network. The grim knights collapsed, their bone armor crumbling to dust. Silas, seeing his queen defeated, vanished into the shadows once more. The lab fell into a sudden, shocking silence, broken only by the hum of the now purified servers and the ragged, pained breathing of the 5 heroes. They had done it. They had cut the head off the snake. But the cost was steep. Blake was bleeding, her shoulder impaled by Penny's wires. Penny lay unconscious, her systems fried. And Naruto collapsed to his knees. His body trembling, his chakra reserves almost completely drained. He was vulnerable, for the first time since he had arrived in this world. As Ironwood's alarms finally blared, and the sound of his approaching soldiers echoed down the hall, they knew they had won a battle, but they had also started a new, far more dangerous war. They had wounded the queen. And now, she would no longer be playing games. She would be coming for them. All of them. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Shattered Crown. The aftermath of the battle in the hidden lab was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. General Ironwood and his specialists descended upon the scene with the force of a military tribunal. They found a room scarred by battle, a handful of unconscious students, a critically damaged, one-of-a-kind android, and a global communications network that had, for 3 terrifying minutes, been completely dark. Their victory was a secret they couldn't share. To Ironwood, they were reckless vigilantes who had nearly destroyed the CCT in his greatest creation. To Ozpin, they were the soldiers who had averted a global catastrophe. They stood at the center of this ideological storm, their faces grim, their bodies bruised and aching. Blake's shoulder was bandaged, the wound a stark, physical reminder of their narrow escape. Naruto was a ghost, his usual vibrant energy dimmed to a pale flicker. The sheer exhaustion of his battle against Salem a visible weight on his shoulders. He was leaning heavily on Yang, who supported him with a fierce, protective glare that dared anyone to come near. The vital festival tournament was, to the shock of the world, put on indefinite hold. The official story was a catastrophic system malfunction, a technical glitch of unprecedented scale. But the fear was palpable. The fragile unity the festival was meant to celebrate had been fractured. The steel fist of Atlas, once seen as a symbol of security, now felt like the grip of a tyrant. Distrust festered between the kingdoms, a poison seeping into the very foundations of their alliance. Salem had lost the battle for the CCT, but she was winning the war for the world's soul. The dorm room, once their sanctuary, now felt like a besieged bunker. They were grounded, confined to Beacon's campus under Ironwood's direct order, pending an official inquiry. It was a cage, and the bars were closing in. The breaking point came in the dead of night. An urgent, coded message from the old ram-horned Faunus in the mines flashed across Blake's scroll. Atlas. They found us. They're coming. Ironwood's patience had run out. His paranoia, stoked by the CCT incident, had led him to launch a full-scale sweep of the city's underbelly, searching for any and all unauthorized activity. The lie Naruto had told, the quarantine he had fabricated, had been exposed. There was no time for a plan, no room for debate. They exchanged a single, grim look. They had made a promise. They would not abandon those people. Their escape from Beacon was a masterpiece of stealth and misdirection. Naruto, using the last dregs of his chakra, created a dozen shadow clones. They set off alarms in the library, started a food fight in the cafeteria, and led the Atlesian patrols on a wild goose chase across the campus. While the castle was in chaos, the real team slipped out, melting into the shadows of the city. They arrived at the mines to a scene from a nightmare. The collapsed entrance had been blasted open. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and fear. The synchronized, brutal tramp of Atlesian paladins echoed from the deep, punctuated by the terrified screams of the refugees. They plunged into the darkness, a 5-person whirlwind of desperate, righteous fury. They were no longer students. They were a single, cohesive unit. An army of 5 against a legion of steel. Yang was a wrecking ball of explosive force, her fists shattering the metal hulls of the knights. Weiss was a blizzard of razor-sharp ice, her glyphs a chaotic, beautiful dance of battlefield control. RWBY was a crimson phantom, her scythe a blur that dismembered and disabled. Blake was a shadow, a whisper of a blade that struck from the darkness, her attacks precise, disabling, and non-lethal against the human soldiers piloting the paladins. Naruto, however, was a ghost. His chakra was nearly gone, his body screaming in protest. He couldn't form a Rasengan, couldn't enter Sage mode. He was running on fumes and sheer, indomitable will. He fought with pure, unadulterated taijutsu, his movements economical, every strike aimed at a joint, a power conduit. A weak point. He was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, but he was no less deadly for it. They fought their way to the main cavern, a desperate, bloody retreat action. They were buying time, holding back the tide of steel so the Faunus could escape through a series of old, forgotten ventilation shafts that led to the surface miles away. But they were hopelessly outnumbered. The cavern was a kill box, and they were at its center. And then, the generals arrived. Ironwood descended from a newly blasted hole in the cavern ceiling, his custom paladin thudding to the ground with the weight of an angry god. From the main tunnel, Ozpin strode in, his cane held loosely in his hand, his expression a mask of grim resolve. They were no longer allies. They were two kings on a battlefield of their own making. And the team was caught in the middle. Stand down, all of you. Ironwood's voice boomed from his mech's external speakers. You are aiding fugitives and engaging in an act of open rebellion against the Atlas military. They are protecting innocent people, James. Ozpin countered, his voice ringing with a quiet, steely authority. People you would have condemned without a trial. The law is the law. Quote, the law is not always the same as justice. As they argued, a new, far more sinister player made her entrance. The ground in the center of the cavern began to crack and heave. A pool of black, viscous grim essence bubbled up from the rock, and from it, a figure rose. It was not Salem. It was a woman, clad in a crimson dress, with pale skin, black hair, and eyes that burned with a malevolent amber fire. A single, glowing ember was embedded in the center of her chest. It was Cinder Fall, the woman who had orchestrated the fall of Beacon in another lifetime, but here, she was something more. She was a vessel, the Fall Maiden, and she was radiating a power that dwarfed anything they had ever felt before. With her were two others, a silent, stoic boy with green-black hair, and a cheerful, psychopathic girl with mismatched pink and brown hair, a wicked grin on her face. Thank you for gathering all my enemies in one place, Cinder said, her voice a silken, mocking purr. It saves me so much time. She raised her hands, and the world caught fire. Pillars of flame erupted from the ground. The grim essence at her feet spread, spawning beowulfs and creepers. Their forms twisted and more powerful than any they had seen before. The cavern became a three-way war zone. The Atlesian Knights, their programming unable to differentiate between the threats, began firing indiscriminately. Ozpin became a blur of green and silver, his cane a conduit for an immense, time-worn power as he engaged Cinder's lieutenants. Ironwood, his face a mask of fury, charged Cinder herself. His paladin's cannons roaring. Team RWBY and Naruto were left to deal with the Grim and the robots, fighting back-to-back in a desperate, shrinking circle, protecting the last of the escaping Faunus. And then, it all went wrong. Cinder, with a cruel laugh, effortlessly melted Ironwood's paladin into a puddle of slag, sending the general crashing to the ground, his cybernetics sparking. She conjured a massive, obsidian spear and hurled it not at the downed general, but at Weiss. There was no time to think. Naruto moved on pure, primal instinct. He shoved Weiss out of the way, the spear impaling him through the side, lifting him off his feet and pinning him to the cavern wall. The world seemed to stop. A collective, horrified gasp echoed in the cavern. Naruto slumped against the black spear, a ragged, wet cough escaping his lips. Blood, dark and crimson, stained the front of his orange jacket. Seeing him fall, something inside Ruby Rose broke. A memory of another loss, a summer long ago, flashed in her mind. A deep, primal grief, a power she didn't know she possessed, erupted from her very soul. A blinding, silver light exploded from her eyes, a wave of pure, unadulterated life force. The antithesis of all things grim. The grim in the cavern were instantly vaporized, turned to dust and smoke. Cinder screamed, shielding her face as the silver light burned her. Her grim infused arm turning to stone. She and her cronies were forced to retreat, vanishing back into the grim pool from which they came. The silver light faded, leaving behind a stunned, echoing silence. Naruto slid to the ground, the obsidian spear dissolving into black mist. He was pale, his breathing shallow. The wound was catastrophic. Even for him, it was a death blow. The four girls rushed to his side, their faces a mask of terror and disbelief. Naruto, Ruby cried, her voice breaking. He looked up at them, a faint, bloody smile on his lips. Looks like I finally ran out of gas, he whispered. Kurama's voice was a frantic, desperate roar in his mind. Kit, the damage is too severe. My chakra can't heal this, not in this barren world. You're dying. Weiss frantically tried to use her aura to seal the wound. But it was like trying to mend a dam with paper. Blake held his hand, her tears falling freely. Yang could only stare, her entire body trembling with a rage and grief so profound it had no outlet. No, Ruby sobbed, her hands hovering over the wound, glowing with a faint, residual silver light. No, you can't. We need you. Naruto looked at their faces, a family he had found in a broken world. He thought of his promise to bring peace. He thought of all the people who had believed in him. He wasn't done yet. Kurama, he whispered, his voice so faint only the fox could hear. There's one last trick, isn't there? The one the old man used. The one that brings people back. The Rinne rebirth. Kurama's mental voice was laced with horror. Naruto, no, that jutsu requires a life for a life. It will kill you, permanently. They are my life, Naruto whispered back. He looked at the 4 girls huddled around him, their faces a portrait of despair. He saw the future of this world in their eyes. A future he would not be a part of. But it was a future he could still save. Not just them, all of them. A profound, impossible choice settled in his heart. He reached up, his trembling hand cupping Ruby's cheek. It's okay, he said, his voice gaining a strange, ethereal strength. Everything is going to be okay. A soft, golden light began to emanate from his body. It was not the fierce, burning power of the 9 tails. It was a gentle, warm, and overwhelmingly peaceful energy. It was pure life force, the culmination of his own immense reserves and the last, desperate gift from his partner. The light washed over the cavern. The injured Atlesian soldiers felt their wounds close. The terrified Faunus felt their despair lift. Ozpin and Ironwood, their conflict forgotten, stared in awe as the golden light healed not just the bodies, but the very spirit of everyone it touched. And then, the light converged, pouring into the 4 girls around him. It flowed into them, not just healing their minor wounds, but infusing them, changing them, sharing with them the last, greatest gift he had to give. A piece of his power. A fragment of his soul. Weiss felt the cold logic of her aura warm with the boundless, creative energy of the sage. Blake felt the shadows of her past illuminated by an unwavering, sun-bright conviction. Yang felt her explosive rage tempered by a deep, immovable resilience. The strength of a mountain. And Ruby felt her own silver-eyed power, the gift of life, connect with his, creating a bond that transcended space and time. He was giving them everything. His blonde hair began to lose its color, turning a stark, snowy white. The whisker marks on his cheeks faded into nothing. The vibrant blue of his eyes dimmed, turning to a soft, pale gray. He was becoming a ghost, his life force spent. Live, he whispered, his last word a promise, a command, a blessing. And then, he was still. The golden light faded, leaving behind a profound, heartbreaking silence. Naruto Uzumaki, the maelstrom of a fallen leaf, the hero of a forgotten war, lay in their arms, a peaceful, empty vessel. But he was not gone. In the hearts of the 4 girls who had become his world. A new power now resided. A shared legacy. A golden sun that would never set. The war was far from over. Salem's darkness was still spreading. But now, they would not face it alone. They would face it as one, carrying the light of the boy who had given them everything. The crown was shattered. The game was broken. And from the ashes of their loss, 4 new queens would rise, their hearts burning with the fire of a fallen hero, ready to build a new world. Chapter 10 End.